His words hung in silence. The sleepers looked at Sonny with a hilarious assortment of emotions, ranging from bewilderment to shock. The young man with humorous eyes just smiled politely. Getting an ascended aspect during the first nightmare was extremely rare, and Sonny knew that. The young man was certainly someone special, maybe even outstanding. Actually, despite their apparent differences, the young man somehow reminded Sonny of Gregor, Aro of the Nine. There was a special type of calculating coldness hidden deep inside their eyes. He had encountered such people before, mostly among the veterans of various street gangs in the outskirts. They simply called this type of coldness murder math. It was a habit experienced fighters developed. No matter where they were and what mood they were in, there was always a sober part of their minds constantly calculating the most efficient way of killing the person in front of them, just in case such a need arose. Ugh, why do I have to antagonize someone like that of all people? But Sonny had no grounds to complain. After all, he brought this on himself. After a few seconds, one of the young man's companions finally blinked and said, Friend, you must not know a lot about the spell. Castor's results are truly remarkable. Then, with a furtive glance at the remarkable Castor, he added, He is a legacy after all. An actual living and breathing descendant of an awakened clan. Sonny reevaluated his opinion of the humorous young man. Legacies were known to be trained for their eventual entrance into the spell from the moment they could walk. For them, being infected was a certainty instead of a possibility. They were extremely formidable people. Just great, he thought bitterly and made his frown deepen. Is that some kind of joke? You call this remarkable? The bewilderment in the eyes of these sleepers was slowly being replaced by hostility. Listen, friend, if you don't think an ascended aspect is remarkable, then please share with us your own amazing results. What, pray tell, was your appraisal? Castor himself was still keeping quiet and smiling. However, his defenders grew restless. This was exactly what Sonny wanted to happen. He smiled with utter contempt. I would let you know. My appraisal was, it was glorious. Yes, glorious. And the aspect I acquired was of the divine rank. After that, he received a number of strange looks. No one had ever received a divine aspect before, so, of course, they were starting to think that he was a liar. But there was still a sliver of doubt. Maybe that strange guy was a descendant of a powerful clan. A peerless prodigy? Maybe his appraisal was indeed glorious. Sonny had to dispel that tiny bit of doubt. Mind you, I'm not some lofty legacy. I'm from the outskirts. I've never even received combat training. All that training and he only got an excellent? What did he do during the nightmare? Pick his nose the whole time? The expressions of all the sleepers that were listening to his bragging instantly changed. An outskirt rat with no training? Yeah, sure. Who was he trying to fool? Finally, with the same polite smile, Castor spoke. Glorious. That is interesting. Would you mind telling us what were your achievements in the nightmare? Sonny grinned. Sure, of course. First of all, I killed an awakened tyrant. Every cost him a couple of moments of intense pain, but he didn't let it show on his face. His expression was nothing but smug and confrontational. The mere mention of a tyrant, let alone an awakened one, made a couple of the sleepers smile with ridicule. Oh, really? How did you kill it? An arrogant look appeared on Sonny's face. How? Let me tell you. I didn't even have to lift a finger. I just spat and it was torn to pieces. Which was true. Sonny had spat a mouthful of blood on the altar, and as a result, the Mountain King was ruthlessly dismembered by the Shadow God. One of the young men openly laughed. This guy is either insane or purposefully messing with us. Listen here, Shorty. Have some decency, okay? Who would believe such a lie? Sonny was genuinely angry. He wanted to retort, saying that he wasn't short, but he couldn't, because that would be a lie. So instead, he just gritted his teeth and said with a voice full of outrage, "I can't answer that because it's not a lie." "Are you honestly insisting that you had killed an awakened tyrant? A tyrant? And with a bit of spit, no less?" Sonny knitted his brows. "That's the truth." More laughter followed. "Crazy bastard."
He actually believes his own bullshit.
"Insane. He's insane." Unexpectedly, Castor stopped his companions. "Guys." After the laughter quieted down, he asked in a friendly manner, "What else did you achieve?" "What? That wasn't enough?" Sonny raised his chin. "Let me think. I killed an awakened swordsman." "Really? How did you do that?" Acting as though he was a little bit embarrassed, Sonny looked down. That time I had to lift a finger. I even had to shake it a couple of times. That was enough to kill him, though." He was holding the silver bell between his fingers, which led to Gregor being attacked and eventually killed by the tyrant. So technically all his statements were true.
What a crackpot!
Can you believe this idiot?
Poor bastard, not only is he weak, he's also completely lost it.
Castor gave his companions a long look and then turned to Sonny.
"Anything else?"
Sonny blinked. Time for the finishing touch. "Something else. Well, I communicated with a bunch of gods, even though they were all dead. I made one of them wake up. He gave me a blessing. I was blessed by a god." The sleepers were silently shaking their heads or looking at him with pity. Castor sighed. "I see. Well, in comparison to your achievements, mine do look rather average. Thank you for sharing with us. I hope you'll be as successful once we enter the dream realm." Sonny smiled with a look of smug superiority on his face. "You better believe it." With that, he turned around and walked away. That was a job well done. He was pretty sure that after this performance, no one would ever believe that he actually had some kind of a powerful aspect or did anything worthy of notice during the nightmare. He only told them the truth, and yet managed to make everyone believe he was completely insane and spewing lies. And it felt amazing. It was a massive relief. What did they think of him now? They thought he was weak, grew up without any education in the outskirts, and had no training. More than that, he was apparently either insane or incredibly stupid, and his temper was terrible. They must have thought he was a truly pathetic and pitiful fellow. Now, whenever he was asked about his aspect, he could just honestly say that it was of the divine rank, and be laughed at. People would rather believe that the spell had ceased to exist than that he was somehow noteworthy. He could even scream about his accomplishments from the rooftops, and no one would believe him. Subsequently, no one would ever suspect that he had a true name. Just you wait. One day, I'll be the one laughing. As Sonny was walking away, he heard one of the sleepers talking to Castor. "Why didn't you put that lunatic in his place? He was so full of shit." After a short pause, Castor answered. His voice sounded low and mellow. "Poor kid must have lost his mind in the nightmare. It happens often. He'll probably die soon. Being kind is the least I can do." The corner of Sonny's mouth twitched. What a nice guy. He knew that Castor's words were based on a false assumption, but for some reason, he felt a cold chill running up his spine. Satisfied with his performance, Sonny walked back to the deserted corner of the hall. He felt people looking at him with mockery, contempt, and pity. No one seemed to be willing to stay close to him. It was just as well. He didn't want to be bothered anyway. Still, weren't their reactions a bit exaggerated? It's not like he was carrying an infectious disease. Well, except for the spell. But it wasn't really a disease, which everyone here should have known already. Eventually, he managed to extricate himself from the crowd and reached the corner. For some reason, sleepers were unwilling to approach it. Currently, there was only one girl sitting quietly on the bench. Sonny gave her a look, The quiet girl was delicate, demure, and very pretty. Her clothes were tidy and neat. They weren't very expensive, but still rather tasteful. With her pale blonde hair, big blue eyes, and exquisite face, she looked like a beautiful porcelain doll. She was subtly breathtaking. However, there was something wrong with her. Sonny frowned, trying to understand what exactly about the girl made him uncomfortable. After a while, he realized that her empty, expressionless stare was reminding him of the Mountain King. Startled, Sonny understood that the girl was blind. It took him a couple of seconds to compose himself. Damn, that's rough. A bit disheartened, he carefully sat on the opposite end of the bench. He wondered how on earth she could have made it through her first nightmare if she had been blind prior to entering the spell. Which meant that she probably lost her sight as a result of the appraisal. It's her flaw. Suddenly, Sonny felt very apprehensive. A cold sensation spread through his chest. And I thought my flaw was bad. No matter what aspect ability the blind girl had received in exchange for her sight, it was effectively a death sentence. A blind person had no chance of surviving in the dream realm, at least not with a dormant core. In some sense, the girl was already dead. She was effectively a walking corpse. Don't give me your pity. I'm sure you're just as fucked as me and everyone else in here. Sonny sat there with his mouth hanging open a moment before his flaw kicked in. Maybe, but you're blind. You're practically dead already. She smirked. I appreciate your brutal honesty. I can't see you, but I can still hear you. Sonny frowned. Do you think your hearing will be enough to survive the dream realm? She shrugged, her face remaining calm. I guess we'll find out soon enough. She turned her head, her eyes looking straight at him with their uncanny milky appearance. Feeling extremely disturbed, Sonny turned away and studied the crowd of sleepers. Now he understood why people were trying to avoid this corner. The girl was surrounded by an invisible but almost palpable aura of death. Sleepers usually weren't very superstitious, but anyone would feel uncomfortable in her company. Armed with this knowledge, Sonny suddenly saw a pattern in how the young people in the hall were grouped. Instinctively, they all tried to stand close to those with similar backgrounds to themselves. At the far end of the hall, closest to the stage, were one or two small groups. People in these groups were distinct from the rest of the sleepers. They were all confident, calm, and had an air of readiness. These were the legacies. They were trained for the spell since birth, and had the highest chances of survival. Castor especially stood out from the rest. Next to them was a larger number of expensively dressed young people. They were lively and excited, and only a little nervous. They were the scions of rich and high-ranking citizens. Their training was pretty good since such families had ample funds to hire private tutors, even awakened ones. Their chances of survival weren't bad. Then there was the largest part of the crowd, which consisted of kids from middle-class families. They might not have had the privilege of training under the awakened tutors, but their education wasn't bad. The government spent a lot of effort to put all the necessary knowledge and skills into the school curriculum, preparing potential sleepers in advance. Some of them might have received additional training in private. To survive, these sleepers would need to put in a valiant effort and also have a bit of luck. But it wasn't improbable. Still, they were tense and nervous. And lastly, there was Sonny and the blind girl, the corpses. From the point of view of the other sleepers in the hall, their chances of survival were close to zero. How charming. This was how the young sleepers had subconsciously divided themselves. The only exception to this rule was the silver-haired girl Sonny had arrived at the academy alongside. She stood alone and apart from everyone, seemingly indifferent to the tension and nervousness that permeated the air. She was leaning against a wall with her eyes closed, still listening to music. Regardless of their group and level of training, Everyone was already tired of waiting.
When will the damn induction ceremony start?
Sonny thought, irritated. As though answering his thoughts, a tall man in a dark blue uniform appeared on stage. Not only was he tall, he was almost a giant. Sonny even wondered if the man's mother had sinned with a bear. Of course it was impossible. Bears had gone extinct long before the spell even appeared, but he once saw pictures in a book, and they looked sort of similar.
A bear-like nightmare creature, then.
The giant man had wide shoulders, an athletic build, and a gorgeous brown beard. His eyes were calm and serious. After reaching the center of the stage, he gave the sleepers a long look. When his gaze reached the deserted corner, Sonny suddenly felt nervous.
I sure hope he doesn't have a telepathic ability. Otherwise, he might separate me from a limb or two on behalf of his mother.
The man didn't pay Sonny a lot of attention and returned his gaze to the front rows of the crowd. Finally, he said in a deep, reverberating voice,
I am Awakened Rock. Sleepers, welcome to the Academy.
Everyone listened without making a sound.
In less than a month, you will be summoned to the Dream Realm. Some of you might think that you are well prepared. You're wrong. The spell is merciless and cunning. The moment Awakened begin to think too much of themselves, they die. I've seen countless sleepers like you lose their lives. I've also seen experienced masters lose theirs. Even saints are not assured to survive.
Thanks for the encouragement,
Sonny thought sarcastically.
In the following 4 weeks, we will do everything in our power to increase your chances of survival. You will receive training from the best instructors in the world. However, don't be misled by their fame. In the end, whether you return from the Dream Realm alive depends only on one person. You. The responsibility to survive is yours and yours alone.
Except for the legacies, sleepers were looking at each other with growing fear in their eyes. Awakened Rock continued.
You are not children anymore. It's a shame, because you ought to be. But the spell has decided otherwise. You have been to the first nightmare, so you already know what it's like. Your parents, your teachers, and your friends can't help you anymore.
Haven't had any of those in a long time.
While listening to Rock's speech, Sonny couldn't help but feel a little excluded. It was all old news to him. However, he understood the instructor's purpose. He had to make young sleepers afraid because fear was the only thing that would keep them alive. Finally, the speech got to the important part. Awakened Rock paused, giving the kids listening to him a few moments to digest his words. Then, with a short nod, he continued.
Now we will talk about the difference between nightmares and the Dream Realm. Because trust me when I say, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Sonny was keenly interested in learning more about the difference between nightmares and dreams. Of course, he had a general knowledge of how things were set inside the spell. But the first nightmare had already shown him that reality was different from how it was portrayed in popular culture in several small but infinitely important ways. He needed to separate the truth from the myths. And, of course, it was very advantageous to hear it from the mouth of someone who had been to the Dream Realm. So Sonny was all ears. Awakened Rock spoke in a clear, crisp voice.
Most people are aware of what nightmares are, because they have an impact on the real world and their lives. All of you have been warned before entering the first nightmare that should you perish there, a nightmare creature would be allowed to cross the threshold and enter reality.
So far, this sounded familiar to Sonny. That was the reason why Master Jet had to wait patiently by his side, prepared to deal with the monster if it appeared. Rock paced as he spoke.
First nightmares are unique because each of them is individual. That's why only a single creature can appear. However, starting from the second nightmare, things have become much more dangerous. These nightmares are not tied to an infected person. Instead, they are born in the dream realm. While the seed of the nightmare is growing, any number of awakened can attempt to conquer it. Should all these awakened all die or fail to find the nightmare seed before it matures, a gate will open in the real world, letting through countless monsters. You all know the consequences. Other awakened will be forced to withstand the onslaught on this side, but then there can be massive destruction or losses among the civilian population.
Every person on the planet feared the sudden appearance of these gates. It was the second disaster the spell brought upon after the nightmare creature's initial appearance. The main difference was that in an initial wave, there were only dormant beasts. However, gates had ranks of their own, and any type of creature could potentially step through. Not long before Sunny was born, a rank 5 gate opening left a whole continent uninhabitable. Luckily, high-rank gates were very rare. Awakened Rock's voice grew solemn.
So, it is not wrong to say that the purpose of the awakened is to enter the dream realm, seek out maturing nightmares, and close them before any harm could befall the real world. From this, you can see that the dream realm and the nightmares are connected, but are not the same. If nightmares are the destination, then the dream realm is the road. But it is also so much more.
Sunny thought to himself,
Very romantic. Does Awakened Rock have poetic inclinations?
Rock continued with his lecture.
Simply put, the dream realm is a world. It is vast, mysterious, and mostly unexplored. It is also dead. There is no life out there except for the nightmare creatures, corrupted ecosystems, and now, us. But it wasn't always dead. We can tell that once, a long time ago, the dream realm was home to several primitive civilizations. There are a lot of ruins buried in its soil.
From what Sunny knew, these lost civilizations were not primitive. It's just that their development was centered around soul cores and mysticism, as opposed to technology. So, miracles and magic. What were their names? How did they fall? No one knew. Maybe they were destroyed by the spell. Sunny fixed his gaze on the awakened Rock, curious to learn more. The teacher motioned with his hands as he spoke.
We don't know if the dream realm exists inside the spell as one of its illusions, just on an imaginably larger scale, or if it's real, with the spell only serving as a pathway between two realities. However, we do suspect that the illusions conjured up inside the nightmares are based on its history. They are replicas of past events, somehow reconstructed from the depths of time.
Sunny blinked in shock. Does that mean there might have been a real slave caravan on that Black Mountain a long time ago? Sunny remembered how time seemed to move in reverse at the beginning of his nightmare. He thought about how things would have ended up without his involvement. Did the nameless temple slave perish in the Mountain King's maw with the rest of the caravan? Somehow, he felt that the nameless slave was not that simple. Otherwise, why would the spell remember him? And what about Gregor? Was he able to escape? The awakened Rock's voice cut off Sunny's wondering.
There are 4 main differences between the dream realm and nightmares. Firstly, it doesn't have a story. There is no predetermined conflict you are forced to resolve. You can move freely and explore, provided you have the strength to stay alive in the wilderness. Most people tend to stay close to one of the human citadels.
Sunny nodded and thought to himself,
That's good to know.
Though the boy was skeptical, even without predetermined conflicts, Sunny suspected his fated attribute would surely steer him into some kind of trouble. So that freedom Awakened Rock had mentioned was relative in his case. Meanwhile, the instructor continued.
Secondly, as I have already mentioned, there are no people in the dream realm. except for those who come from the real world. There are only monsters. Some of them can mimic human appearance, though, so be mindful of that.
Sonny felt cold sweat running down his back. Nightmare creatures mimicking humans? So creepy. Since when was that a thing? Why hasn't he ever heard about it? He stole a glance at the legacies standing in the first row and noticed that they did not show any signs of surprise. So, they knew.
Thirdly, unlike the first nightmare, no nightmare creatures will appear in the real world if you die in the dream realm. It may sound cruel, but that's a good thing. Awakened forces are already spread thin. If we had to monitor every sleeper, we wouldn't have resources to handle more important matters.
Considering that each sleeper could spend weeks, sometimes even months in the dream realm, there was ruthless logic in that statement. Awakened Rock moved on to his final point.
And lastly, and most importantly, unlike nightmares which are bound by the rules of fairness, there is no limit to what kind of creature you can meet in the dream realm. During its trials, the spell won't pit a dormant human against an opponent many ranks above them.
Oh, really?
Sonny thought to himself snarkily. However, he was forced to agree with Awakened Rock. Even though both Gregor and Mountain King were way out of his league, they were still just one rank above him.
But in the dream realm, no such restrictions exist. Theoretically, you can stumble upon an unholy titan and die before even realizing what happened. So be careful, and stick to the regions with enemies on par with your own rank. It's not an ironclad guarantee, but at least there will be less of a chance of you biting off more than you can chew.
Sticking to a region populated by nightmare creatures below his rank was even better. That was exactly what Sonny was planning to do. Awakened Rock paused for a few moments, studying the faces of the sleepers in front of him. Then he added,
When the solstice comes, you will be drawn into the dream realm. The exact location of where you will appear can't be predicted in advance, but there is a high chance that many of you will find yourself near each other. Band together and proceed to the nearest human citadel. Each citadel is built around a gateway. Once you reach it, you will be able to return.
Gateways were special portals that served as exit points from the dream realm. Once sleepers reached such a portal, they would be able to escape back to reality and become awakened. Their core would evolve, and they would also receive a second aspect ability. After that, they would return to the dream realm each time they fell asleep. Rock continued,
If you can't locate or are unable to reach the nearest human citadel, search for an unclaimed gateway. It will usually be inside or near the most prominent landmark of the region. Work together to defeat its guardians and come back alive.
He gave them a heavy look.
That is all for today. Next, follow the instructions sent to your communicators to find your assigned dormitory. Once settled, you may proceed to the cafeteria for some late supper. There will be a round of interviews after that to prepare your suggested curriculums. Get a good night's rest. Your training starts tomorrow.
With that, he gave them a short nod and left. Sonny sighed.
Can't be predicted in advance, huh?
With his luck, he would either drop right in the middle of a prosperous human citadel and immediately roll into a gateway, or appear in some remote region of the dream realm, so remote and deadly that no one had ever heard about it or returned from it alive. Sonny hated the fact he was powerless to prepare for his next journey in any meaningful way. He knew that thanks to his damned fated ability, every journey into the dream realm had an increased chance of being the last. What's worse was that the Awakened Rock's main advice seemed to be to form bonds and alliances with other sleeps. But Sonny had already done such a fantastic job of alienating himself from everyone. He glanced around the room and saw the other sleepers bunching up into tiny cliques. And Heisei alone in the corner. He cursed his flaw. Would his whole life be this awful, regardless of which world he was in? There had to be a way to fix this. He needed to make friends like his life depended on it. Because it might. The academy was designed so that everything the sleepers needed could be found in the same building. Sonny followed the instructions sent to his communicator and quickly found the dormitories, which were situated on one of the lowest levels. To his surprise, he actually got a whole room to himself. The room had a bed with a soft mattress, a table, a dresser, and even a separate bathroom. Given his life in the outskirts, these simple amenities felt luxurious to Sonny. The materials were new and aesthetically pleasing, the air crisp and sterile. It was warm inside, and the outer wall was equipped with a hidden screen that seamlessly imitated a wide window, opening to a picturesque vista of a snowy park. There were even several sets of clothes with the Academy emblem provided to him for free. Sonny was a little stunned.
How extravagant.
Rationally, he understood that such an arrangement was not really luxurious. However, given all he was used to, what little he had back in his home, this room was like a palace. He scratched his head. Sonny smirked.
Looks like I've made it.
Sonny glanced around, then winked at his shadow and smiled.
I guess we're moving up in the world, huh?
The shadow didn't respond, apparently not very impressed. Perhaps it didn't care about such things. Sonny shrugged.
Right. What would a stupid shadow know about the finer things in life?
Sonny changed into new clothes and then studied himself in the mirror. Then, remembering something, he summoned the runes. He finally had time to study the puppeteer's shroud. His eyes scanned over the runes. Memory, puppeteer's shroud, memory rank, awakened, memory type, armor. Sonny tilted his head to the side. Armor? He hadn't expected that. He returned his attention to the runes. Memory description. A worm of doubt once found its way into a righteous king's heart. With time, the king was devoured from the inside and became its puppet. A lifetime later, the puppeteer worm escaped from the king's dead body, leaving behind a cocoon of black silk. No one knows where it went. However, once people dared to approach the silent castle, they found the silk among the mountains of gnawed bones and fashioned it into armor. Sonny made a sour face.
That is not that terrifying. Yeah, I'm not creeped out at all.
Come to think of it, the first creature he killed was a larva. If he were to assume that Mountain King was a mature puppeteer worm, and already a tyrant, then what the hell would it transform into after becoming a moth? On second thought, it might be better not to dwell on it. The Mountain King was dead. What it could have become didn't matter. With a sigh, Sonny summoned the puppeteer's shroud. Thin black threads immediately appeared around his body and wrapped it into a set of armor. It was made of dark, gray, soft fabric, with several elements such as bracers and shoulder guards fashioned out of black, lusterless leather. The armor was light, understated, and did not restrain his movements at all. It also made no sound when he moved. Perfect equipment for someone who likes to lurk in the shadows. Sonny smiled. He knew that this armor would be tough to pierce for any creature below the awakened rank, which gave him a great advantage in dealing with all dormant monsters. He also felt a sort of strange, faint calmness while wearing it. He thought about the verbose description of the armor. It had mentioned a worm of doubt. Does that mean the armor had enhanced protection against mental attacks? Somehow, he was sure of it. This was a great trophy. He wouldn't expect anything less from the memory of a powerful tyrant. The only problem was that the puppeteer's shroud was not meant to be worn on top of a full set of clothes. Quite satisfied, Sonny dismissed it and left his room, heading for the cafeteria. Sonny reflected on all the rewards he had received for completing the first nightmare and thought to himself,
Not bad. Not bad at all.
The dining hall turned out to be as lavish as the dormitory. Sonny's wish to taste real meat finally came true. Not only was it freely available to sleepers, but there wasn't even a limit to the amount each of them could eat. More than that, there was rice,
bread, various side dishes, sauces, fresh vegetables, fruits, and all kinds of delicious beverages. Sonny steered clear of the coffee and thought, "This is all so extravagant." After building a small mountain of food on his plate, he found an empty seat and, for a while, forgot about the world's existence. As juicy, textured, perfectly seasoned meat filled his mouth, Sonny's vision suddenly was full of stars. He had to hold back an exhilarated moan. And to think, he could have lived like that for a whole year. Damn, Spell, why didn't you infect me a few months ago? He concentrated on the food, decimating the whole plate in no time, satiated and more than a little full. Sonny longingly looked back and thought about getting another serving, but it was already time for his appointment with the Academy personnel. Vowing to return, he stood up and left the cafeteria. Soon, he found himself in a small office, sitting across from an administrative worker. The worker was very friendly and started the interview right away. Just like Master Jet had warned him, Sonny was offered psychological counseling again. Remembering her advice, he refused, and the interview smoothly switched to questions about his aspect. He didn't want to give up information about his abilities, but also knew that he had to tell the worker something. Luckily, the questions were worded in a way to put sleepers at ease. As such, most of them started with nice and polite preambles like, "Would you like to tell me?" or "If you are willing to share," which gave Sonny an opportunity to give neutral answers. "Would you mind telling me about the type of aspect ability you received? As in combat, sorcery, utility?" He did mind, but had to be careful. I'm not sure. I haven't had time to understand it well." The administrator nodded and offered a welcoming smile. "That's all right. Are you able to directly deal damage with your ability?" Sonny chose his words carefully. "I guess not. Earlier I wasn't even able to harm a towel." Things went on like that. In the end, Sonny shared just enough information to create an impression that his aspect was weak, harmless, and most likely having something to do with utility. After that, he returned to his room, undressed, and went to sleep. Sonny thought that falling asleep for the first time after a nightmare would be weird, but in fact, it was surprisingly easy. Laying on a soft mattress with his skin against clean bed sheets and a fluffy pillow under his head, he slept like a baby. The next morning, Sonny washed up in his private bathroom and, bursting with energy, hurried to get breakfast in a happy mood. The cafeteria was a bit crowded. After filling his plate with all kinds of delicious stuff, he quickly realized that the only place he could sit was near the blind girl from yesterday. Her table was empty since no one wanted to be close to her. Sonny grimaced. It seemed that the two of them were doomed to be outcasts together for the remaining 4 weeks. He felt a pang of sadness at the fact that this young girl would have such an uphill fight in the dream realm. He had wanted to make friends who could be strong allies, but she was the only person he stood a real chance of cozying up to. Losing his good mood, he sat at the blind girl's table and gave a precursory nod to the social worker who was helping her get around. After that, he tried to pretend that they didn't exist and concentrated on his food. However, before he could finish, a sudden commotion drew his attention. "What's going on?" He looked up and noticed that a lot of sleepers were gathered around the large screen hanging on the wall of the cafeteria, their faces filled with excitement and awe. On the screen, a list of names displayed, ranking the new batch of sleepers from weakest to strongest, most likely deduced from the results of the interviews. Not particularly interested, he quickly found his own name near the bottom of the list. The only sleeper who the Academy judged to be less likely to succeed than him was the blind girl. Turns out, her name was Cassia. But the commotion was a bit too loud to be just the result of the ranking. Curious, he moved his gaze up. The sleepers were restless. A series of baffled voices rose from the crowd. How can this be? I'm not seeing things right. Castor was only placed in second place. The cafeteria was scandalized. Everyone expected a legacy like Castor to be at the very top, but above him, there was a portrait of the silver-haired girl Sunny first noticed upon arrival. To the right of the picture, 2 simple lines of text were displayed. Name, Nephis. True name, Changing Star. Sunny was floored to learn the seemingly calm and collected young woman was the most powerful among them. Who was she? He turned to scan the room but couldn't find her. He needed to know more about this Nephis, and fast. So the silver-haired girl Nephis also received a true name in her first nightmare. To get his own, Sunny had to deal with Hero and Mountain King while possessing a completely useless aspect, an impossible feat that seemed to have pleased the spell very much. He wondered how she had gotten hers. Sleepers in the cafeteria were struck dumb by the revelation of this achievement. They were staring at the screen with astonishment, fear, and admiration. Listening to their excited whispers, Sunny felt a childish desire to scream, "Me too! I have one too!" But of course he kept quiet. Looking around, he noticed Castor's gaze fixed on the screen. There was a strange, somber expression on the humorous young man's face. But the weird thing about it was that, as far as Sunny could tell, Castor wasn't looking at the line of text containing the true name. Instead, he was staring at the line of text that read, Nephis, as though the girl's actual name held more meaning to him than the one given by the spell. Sunny made note of this fact and wondered if those two might already know each other. Why would a lofty legacy know someone who came to the academy in a police-issued tracksuit? And speaking of Nephis, where was she? Sunny glanced around the cafeteria and quickly noticed the silver-haired girl, who was sitting quietly in a corner with a cup of coffee in her hands. She wasn't paying a lot of attention to the commotion, seemingly immersed in her thoughts. Her gray eyes were serious and distant. Meanwhile, the table across from Sunny was abuzz with the news. One student shook his head. "A sleeper with a true name? That's impossible." The girl next to him leaned in. "It's technically possible. Smile of Heaven received her true name in the first nightmare, I think. But yeah, I'm doubtful." A third student shrugged. "Maybe she lied in the interview." The first boy snorted. "Are you stupid? If it was that easy to deceive the administrators, the crazy pervert from yesterday would have been in the first place instead." Sunny's face twitched. So that was his reputation, huh? The crazy pervert? Making allies was going to be even harder than he feared. The table across from him continued with their chatter. "Well, why don't we just ask her?" Suddenly, there was a deafening silence in the cafeteria. Following the suggestion, sleepers stopped talking and turned around, staring at Nephis. However, no one seemed to have the courage to approach her first. Finally sensing something, she raised her eyes and looked at them with surprise. What?" Even the blind girl, Cassia, turned in the direction of her voice. After a couple of moments, Castor suddenly walked over and made a small bow. "Lady Nephis, I am Castor Lee. I see that your trial went well?" Sunny's brow furrowed. Did he just call Nephis Lady? Why is he addressing her that way? And he had to introduce himself, so they must not know each other after all. Nephis seemed to be a bit perplexed by the question. After thinking for a while, she smiled brightly and shrugged. "It is what it is." Castor awkwardly returned the smile. "I see. I am very glad that you returned unharmed. Not that I doubted your abilities." Nephis nodded. "Thank you." After that, she returned to her coffee, indicating that the conversation was over, or simply oblivious to everyone's attention. Sunny sighed. How mysterious. There were a lot of thoughts on his mind. However, none of them could distract him from the most important thing, breakfast. A few seconds later, he had forgotten all about the awkward dynamic between Castor and Nephis, and was happily shoveling down his food. After breakfast, Sonny made his way to the wilderness survival class. He was pleased to see it on his schedule, remembering how important Jet said it was. The wilderness survival classroom was spacious and completely empty. Sonny even thought that he was mistaken, but then spotted a gloomy instructor sitting behind a wide wooden desk. Noticing him, the instructor perked up. "Come in, young man." He was a lively old man with messy gray hair, absent-minded eyes, and a pair of bushy eyebrows that seemed to jump around on their own. "I'm Awakened Julius. You can call me Teacher Julius. Sit down, sit down. What's your name?" Sonny obediently sat down. "It's Sunless." Julius raised his eyebrows. "Ah, what an ominous name. But that is good, very good. After all, we have to deal with a lot of ominous things." Sonny carefully looked around. I'm sorry, teacher, did I come too early?" Julius tried to muster a smile. No, you're right on time." Sonny paused a moment. "Are other students late?" The instructor grunted with incredible contempt. "No one else is coming. Those brutes are only interested in swinging their fists and swords around. Very few are smart like you and know the true value of knowledge." Sonny was shocked that this class was that unpopular. He inwardly sighed, hoping that he wouldn't regret the decision to abandon combat training in favor of this course. Julius tried to clear up the foul mood that had overtaken the room. "Say, young man, why did you choose wilderness survival of all things?" There was no point in hiding the true reason. Not that Sonny would have been able to anyway. "The Awakened that monitored me during the first nightmare, Master Jet, had advised me to study it above all things." Julius was delighted initially. "Very wise advice. That master truly knows what's important. Wait, did you say Jet?" "Oh." His eyes widened. "Soul Reaper Jet? That murderous savage? Who would have thought that a barbarian like her would know the value of intricate knowledge?" Sonny's curiosity was piqued. What was a Soul Reaper? Jet had seemed kind and welcoming to him, but her name carried a degree of infamy. "Teacher, do you know Master Jet?" Julius carefully looked behind his back before answering. "Who doesn't know the Soul Reaper? She might not be the most powerful Awakened out there, but she is certainly one of the most feared. That's because her aspect abilities disregard flesh and target soul cores directly. Which means that no amount of armor, damage resistance, and physical protection can stop them." Julius leaned forward. "The only good thing is that she's young and not likely to become a saint anytime soon. Or even ever. Yes. Luckily, there's a very low probability that she'll ever advance." Sonny blinked. "Why?" Julius looked at him as though trying to comprehend how someone could be so ignorant. "Because of her problematic personality, of course. Who would want to help a psychopathic killer become a saint? You need a team of outstanding companions and a lot of support to attempt to conquer the third nightmare. Soul Reaper Jet isn't... Wait." Suddenly Julius frowned and leaned back. "Why am I gossiping with you? You're too young to know such things. More than that, it's not in my character to badmouth others behind their backs." Sonny thought sarcastically. Apparently not. But he already got a lot of juicy information out of Teacher Julius, so he didn't press the issue. Turns out there was more than one benefit to choosing wilderness survival. Julius cleared his throat. Let's get back to your curriculum. What other courses are you taking?" Sonny sighed. "None. For the next 4 weeks, I'll be fully concentrated on wilderness survival." Julius stared at him for a whole minute, an expression of utter astonishment written clearly on his face. Then slowly an excited gleam appeared in his eyes. Finally he grinned.
Wonderful! This is wonderful! You're such an astute young man. Don't you worry. In 4 whole weeks, I will make you immortal.
Sonny's lessons with teacher Julius started pleasantly and without much tension, but just an hour later he felt like his head was ready to explode. There was so much new information, and all of it was so strange and counterintuitive for someone who had never left the walled-off, sheltered confines of the city. From time to time, Julius gasped at Sonny's lack of knowledge and relevant experience. However, he had a good attitude and an endless enthusiasm for teaching. Whenever Sonny stumbled, he would patiently slow down and allow his student to catch up. The curriculum that Julius planned out was practically insane. There was an endless amount of theoretical knowledge to learn, practical lessons both in virtual reality and the real world, and numerous obscure niche subjects to study. There were even several lessons dedicated exclusively to learning the basics of several dead languages of the dream realm. Sonny doubted Julius's decisions.
Why would I need to learn new languages? The spell automatically translates everything.
Julius was uncompromising.
The spell is not a translator. Do you think it has the time to express the intricacies of human speech? Let's say you're seeking after shelter in a ruin and find an inscription that reads, "Certain death ahead." There are 30 words for death in the rune language. Just by knowing the runes, you'll be able to deduce what kind of danger there is.
On the first day, they studied until the sun was about to set. Only then did Julius decide to let Sonny go. Mentally exhausted and lamenting the fact that he had to miss lunch and dinner, Sonny decided to gently remind his teacher about the importance of food for maintaining high levels of concentration tomorrow. After returning to his room, he fell on a chair and stared blankly into the distance for a while. Then, as though remembering something, Sonny turned to his shadow. He observed the shadow for a few seconds and then grinned.
Let's see what you can really do.
Sonny was pretty sure that his shadow was capable of much more than just being a silent follower. After all, the spell had described it as being an invaluable helper. It was now up to him to find out how exactly shadow control could be of help. As in many other matters having to do with aspects, there was a certain level of instinctual understanding buried deep inside his subconscious. This understanding was either given to him by the spell or was something innate to every awakened. Sonny just had to sense the subconscious knowledge and learn how to put it into practice. Once again, he concentrated on sensing his body and spirit, then commanded the shadow to perform a series of simple motions. With each of them, he was growing more and more familiar with the feeling of controlling the shadow. Pretty soon, it was as natural to him as breathing and walking. The shadow felt like part of his body. Satisfied with this initial result, Sonny carefully gave it a new command. Without pause, the shadow separated itself from the soles of his shoes, walked to the other end of the room, and turned around, staring at him in slightly mocking silence. Sonny was left without a shadow. He smiled in amusement.
This seems scientifically impossible.
Science never really applied to anything having to do with the spell, after all. As the shadow walked away, he felt a very weird split happening in his mind. It was like his perception had separated into two distinct sources. One was his body, the other, his shadow. With a bit of trying, he managed to focus on the second source. Instantly, his vision blurred.
Whoa!
The shadow heard from the other end of the room. Sonny blinked. In his mind, there now existed two pictures. One was of his room's door, with an indifferent shadow standing in front of it. The other was of a pale young man sitting on a chair, wide-eyed and bewildered. Sonny was floored by the realization he was staring at himself. He raised an arm and waved it in the air. Simultaneously, the pale young man raised and waved his. He realized he could command his shadow, but being able to use its senses. opened a whole new world of possibilities. He sat for a while thinking. An ability like that opened up a lot of doors, with his Child of Shadows attribute allowing him to see and move stealthily in the darkness, and shadow control allowing him to send out a sneaky shadow as a scout. He was pretty much a perfect spy. A spy was someone who gathered information without exposing themselves to a lot of risk. A role like that suited Sonny's taste very much. Of course, spies were also able to strike from the shadows with deadly precision. Armed with information, they were masterful ambushers. With the prior knowledge of the opponent's weakness, their attacks were surgical and lethal. But any direct confrontation would mean putting himself in danger, so Sonny wasn't very keen on becoming an assassin. After all, his aspect still lacked the means of directly enhancing his combat performance. Sonny mused, "Shall we test it?" He looked at the shadow and gave it a command. With an exaggerated sigh, the shadow bent down and nimbly slid under the door. Instantly, he could see both the room and the hallway outside. Sonny closed his eyes to focus on the picture projected from the shadow. Moving stealthily from one shadow to another, it glided down the hallway. With a bit of timing and consideration, his scout was practically invisible. Sonny passed by a couple of sleepers and listened in on their conversation. Not finding it very interesting, he continued forward. Finally, the shadow stopped at a corner. To its left were the elevators, to its right, the way to the girls' dormitory. All sorts of provocative images immediately entered Sonny's head. He blushed. Oh my. With this ability, it was very easy to fall into utter depravity, but he would never violate others in that way. Sonny directed his scout to hide in the shadow of a passing sleeper and followed him to the elevators. Sonny continued to order his shadow around the winding corridors of the academy. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, really just practicing his ability. This wandering brought his shadow into a large dojo. Here he observed his fellow sleepers who, under the guidance of Instructor Rock, were going through the motions of the introductory combat class. Today was mainly dedicated to testing their general competency and abilities. After that, the sleepers were going to be separated into groups based on their level, such as novice, advanced, or expert, as well as their weapon of choice. Some would be assigned a personal tutor or paired together. Currently, sleepers were taking turns delivering their strongest punches to a wide plate attached to a special measuring machine. After each strike, the machine would display a number corresponding to the sleeper's physical strength. In theory, a machine like that was not hard to build. However, considering that many sleepers had combat-oriented aspects that enhanced their might in a variety of ways, it was a marvel of engineering and durability. Their technique and training also affected the final result. Most people were getting numbers ranging from 10 to 14. It was considered a good result, something that only the most athletic people could reach. However, a lot of sleepers, obviously those with enhancing aspects, were able to achieve a score of 15 or even 16. Sonny considered how he'd perform if he did take combat classes. I would probably get 10 or 11. Then he suddenly perked up, noticing that it was his turn for Nephis, the highest-ranked sleeper of their batch, to strike the plate. The slender girl approached the machine and, without much preparation, delivered a sudden, crushing blow. Sonny wasn't very well versed in martial arts, but even he was impressed by the flawless economy and speed of her execution. Sonny thought to himself, she must have a lot of training. Nephis was becoming more and more intriguing. What's her actual background? After a short pause, the machine displayed the result, 16. Sonny felt a bit disappointed. He was expecting something a bit higher. She was the proud bearer of a true name, after all. After that, only Castor remained. This time, Sonny couldn't even see the flying fist. It was just too fast. The machine trembled and took more time to calculate. Finally, 2 numbers appeared. Castor scored a 21. Everyone gaped at the display, stunned. More than a few admiring looks were thrown at Castor, who simply bowed and took a step back. Instructor Rock smiled.
Not bad. Now we will move to sparring and evaluate your general level of training. I need 2 volunteers to begin.
Nephis was the first to step forward and walk to the center of the ring. A couple of seconds later, a tall and extremely muscular sleeper followed and faced her. Awakened Rock stood between them.
The rules are simple. Make your opponent's back touch the floor or throw them out of the ring. Use whatever abilities and techniques you find appropriate.
In his room, Sonny was on the edge of his seat. Oh, the show is starting! Watching sleepers fight each other was not only entertaining, but could also provide Sonny with knowledge of their powers. Back in the room, he leaned forward and rested his chin on his palms. Go, Nephis! The tall guy attacked without wasting any time. His muscles bulged, threatening to tear the soft fabric of his white dobok. He advanced like an unstoppable mountain, sending a vicious kick flying. A second later, he was laying on the floor with a dumbstruck look on his face. Nephis didn't even change her stance. Instructor Rock gave her a cheerful look and grinned.
Next.
What followed could only be described as a massacre. One after another, Nephis managed to defeat almost every single sleeper present in the dojo. She didn't seem to be faster or stronger than them, but each time someone entered the ring to fight her, they would inevitably end up beaten and thrown to the ground. Sonny watched the process with a growing sense of amusement. However, at some point, even he felt a bit of unease. Nephis moved with the calm precision of a battle machine. Her technique was clean, graceful, and ruthless. No matter what type of attack was thrown at her, she was able to either predict or instantly react to it, then deflect and turn it against the attacker with the minimum amount of effort. It didn't matter whether her opponent was poor, rich, or a legacy. Everyone would end up dealt with in a matter of seconds. What's more, throughout the whole process, the composed expression on her face didn't even change once. It was like Nephis was made out of metal. Sonny found himself suddenly apprehensive. Is she even human? What was he going to do if this changing star were to end up as his enemy? The best course of action would be to run away, or better yet, try not to antagonize her to begin with. After all, the sun was also a star, and shadows didn't mix well with sunlight. Finally, Castor was the last one remaining, once again. However, he didn't seem to be perturbed by the miserable failure of every other sleeper. With a soft smile on his lips, the young man stepped into the ring. Castor and Nephis faced each other. Their eyes locked for a few seconds, and then Castor slightly bowed.
Lady Nephis, please excuse me in advance.
Sonny leaned forward. What is he going to? Sonny's eyes snapped open in total and utter shock. It seemed like Castor suddenly ceased to exist. However, it was only an illusion. The truth was that he was just moving so fast that the human eye wasn't able to keep up with his movements. If it wasn't for the special properties of shadow sight, Sonny wouldn't have been able to perceive anything either. Even then, he only noticed a hazy blur streaking through the air. In a fraction of a second, Castor covered the distance between him and Nephis and delivered a devastating blow. However, despite his astonishing speed, she somehow managed to react in time, slightly turning her body to deflect the strike. But it wasn't enough. Although Nephis had managed to avoid being hit squarely in the center of gravity, Castor's fist ended up connecting with her shoulder, sending the girl into a spin. Not wasting any time, Castor disappeared again. His plan was very simple. While Nephis was still under the impression that the enemy was in front of her, he was going to use his unnatural swiftness to circle around and attack from the back. The young man appeared behind the oblivious girl, ready to finish the fight with one decisive strike. Just as he had planned, she seemed to be preparing to attack in the direction he had been approaching from just a split second ago. Gratified, Castor shifted his weight, putting it all into his fist. However, at the last moment, Nephis suddenly changed her stance and threw her elbow back with frightening force. Castor's eyes widened, It was all a feint. And now that he had committed to a strike, there was no simple way to stop. No matter how fast he was still subject to the laws of inertia. The elbow was approaching his face with a profound feeling of inevitability. And yet, Castor still managed to avoid it, even if it was just by a hair's breadth. His speed advantage was just too great. He then proceeded to trip and push Nephis, sending her flying to the ground. However, just before she was about to hit the mats, the young man carefully grabbed the collar of her dobok and gently pulled, slowing down the fall and allowing Nephis to land on the floor without any impact. Laying on her back, the girl blinked a couple of times and looked up at him. The whole altercation lasted no more than 2 seconds. Back in his room, Sonny blinked in shock. So that's an ascended aspect? That's cheating! A sleeper had no business being that fast. The powers bestowed upon them by the spell were supposed to be in their infancy, but Castor was a legacy after all. Who knew how many soul shards were fed to him before enrolling in the academy? Back in the dojo, Instructor Rock grunted and gave Castor a nod. Nephis slowly rose to her feet. The rest of the sleepers were gawking at the young man with reverence, whispering among each other in hushed tones. It seemed that his performance left them with a deep reverence for him. However, Castor himself wasn't very elated. He glanced at Nephis with an unreadable expression. That was because, unlike the rest of them, he came to a certain realization. The truth of the matter was known only to him, Nephis, Instructor Rock, and Sonny, who was very observant and quickly picked up on such things. The thing that sleepers failed to notice was that Nephis did not use her aspect ability when facing Castor. In fact, she had not used it at any point during today's testing. No one even knew what her ability was. And yet, despite his powerful aspect, Castor barely managed to clutch a victory against her. What a beast, Sonny thought, full of unease. The shadow hiding in the corner of the dojo seemed to agree with him wholeheartedly. After that, the introductory combat class was over. Sore from the beating they received, sleepers headed for the showers. Sonny waited for a bit and then directed his shadow to follow Castor into the boys' locker room. There was a slight possibility that Castor would either comment on his duel with Nephis or answer some questions about his incredible aspect ability, and Sonny hoped to overhear them. Just as Sonny had hoped, the young man was surrounded by a group of newly converted fans. They were congratulating him on his victory, full of adoration and excitement. However, Castor himself seemed to be in a bad mood. His expression was somber, and there was a grim heaviness in his eyes. In fact, his face grew darker with each praise he received. One fan obliviously blathered, "Castor, that was incredible." Another boy grinned ear to ear. "Your aspect is overpowered, am I right?" The first nodded enthusiastically. "That Nephis girl stood no chance at all." Another voice from the crowd rang out, "True name? Who needs that? She's just a wannabe." Finally, Castor slammed his locker door. He raised his head and pierced the last boy who had spoken with a cold look. That boy, just like him, was one of the few legacies in their batch of sleepers. The boy frowned, surprised by Castor's reaction. "What is it?" Castor gritted his teeth. "I might have expected such behavior from them, but you should know better." The other legacy raised an eyebrow. "Why? Is there something special about that peasant girl?" Castor's eyes widened. Peasant girl? Do you really not know who she is?" Back in his room, Sonny was abuzz with excitement. This was just the kind of intel he'd hoped for, but he wished they'd stop beating around the bush. "Just get to it and say it out loud." Luckily, the arrogant sleeper had the same sentiment. "You gonna tell me or whine about it?" Castor opened his mouth several times, as though not sure what to say. Finally, he shook his head and answered, She is Nephis, descendant of the immortal flame. As soon as he said that, the arrogant legacy became deathly pale. Not paying him any attention, Castor continued. I trust that I don't need to tell you about her grandfather. Her parents were Smile of Heaven and Broken Sword. In his room, Sunny almost fell from the chair. Even he knew who Immortal Flame and Broken Sword were. The former was the first human to conquer the second nightmare and become a master. The latter, the first one to conquer the third nightmare and become a saint. They, as well as their companions, were among the most famous heroes of the human race. Someone who had managed to change history with their own two hands. If what Castor said was true, then Nephis wasn't just an aristocrat. She was royalty. No wonder he addressed her as lady. Why didn't he just call her princess instead? Sunny struggled to square this reality with the state Nephis was in when they met. Echoing Sunny's thoughts, the pale-faced sleeper asked in a trembling voice, Then why is she so... Castor sighed. Because they're all dead. The Immortal Flame clan is long gone. For a few moments, the locker room was completely silent. Castor looked down. She's the only one left. Sunny felt a pang in his heart. Nephis was an orphan, like him. The sad revelation seemed to kill the triumphant mood and threw water on further gossip. Sunny assumed he'd get no more intel and called his shadow back. Late at night, when everyone was already asleep, Sunny furtively entered the dojo. Looking around, he made sure that no one was there, and then curiously approached the ring where Nephis and others had been tested earlier. He stopped at the center of the ring and stood there for a while, remembering how she had dealt with dozens of sleepers of their batch before being defeated by Castor. Bitter and disheartened, Sunny mumbled, Monsters! Both of them are monsters! Shaking his head, Sunny left the ring, and then he looked at his shadow. Do you agree? The shadow hesitated for a few seconds, then stuck out its chest and crossed its arms, trying to appear cocky, disdainful, and unperturbed. Sunny nodded to his shadow in agreement. Yeah, you're right, exactly. What's the big deal anyway? Both Immortal Flame and Broken Sword, Nephis's grandfather and father respectively, were as incomparable in terms of power as one can get, but they still failed to protect their family from being eviscerated. So, power wasn't that important in the end. Even the most elite warriors were not safe from the cruelty of the world. Sunny sighed and proceeded to the measuring machine. Making a fist, he swung it and delivered his best punch. The machine hummed for a few seconds and then displayed a single number, 9. Sunny scowled. Oh, come on. I deserve a 10 at least. Feeling very indignant, he struck the plate again, almost hurting his fingers. However, the result was the same. Damn it! Sunny paced for a bit, trying to control his anger. It seems he was destined to be a weakling. After all, the force of the strike depended on mass and acceleration. Acceleration could be improved with technique and exercise, but the mass was something he had little control over. He was already done growing, and his height was not going to drastically increase in the future. No matter how hard Sunny trained, he was always going to be a lightweight. How is this fair? Suddenly filled with resentment, he punched the plate again, putting all of his frustration into this one strike. At that moment, a strange instinct suddenly awakened in Sunny's mind. Following the command of this instinct, his shadow flowed up and wrapped itself around his hand, sticking to it like a black glove. In the next moment, the punch connected. The machine trembled from the force of the strike. Sunny yelped in pain and took a step back, cradling his bruised fist. After a while, the result was displayed. However, it wasn't a 9 anymore. It wasn't even a 10. It was 18. He looked at the displayed number for a long time, expressionless. Then a wide grin slowly appeared on Sunny's face. Of course! He clenched his fist again, looking down at the black, shadowy glove. Ah, what an invaluable helper indeed. Now we're talking. Just how far could he push this? Was it possible with his shadow's help he could double his strength? Days flew by. Sunny only had 4 weeks to prepare himself for the journey into the dream realm, so he barely had a second to spare for sleep, much less preparation. That didn't matter though, because he was relentless. Each day he pushed his body and mind to their limits in an attempt to absorb as much knowledge and skills as possible in that short amount of time. His days were packed with solo study as he stuck to his plan as Master Jet had suggested. He was focusing on survival lessons. He studied with Teacher Julius, slowly learning how to survive and take care of himself in the absence of civilization. Their lessons ranged from comparatively simple, like various ways to produce fire, to much more obscure and esoteric, like celestial navigation. What was so hard about celestial navigation? Well, as it turned out, the dream realm was not consistent in terms of star geography. Different regions had different stars and constellations, as well as a different number of moons. While the sun seemed to be the same, its behavior was highly unpredictable. Still, with sufficient knowledge, one could find ways to study the skies and subsequently navigate through the world. Most of these lessons were, supposedly, included in the various school curriculums. Most of his fellow sleepers had grown up learning these basics. However, learning something from a textbook and learning the same thing from an actual awakened were two completely different matters. Teacher Julius had a habit of going much more in depth when explaining his subject. Thanks to this time-consuming habit of his, Sunny not only learned about the what, but also often gained glimpses into the why. This nascent understanding of the underlying principles of the dream realm environments gave him a deeper understanding of the world he was about to be thrown into. He wasn't sure how useful this information would be, but it seemed to calm his nerves, making him feel like he had a greater understanding of the new life that lay before him. Even the lessons in dead languages, which Sunny had initially judged to be useless, turned out to be much more interesting than he could ever imagine. This was, in large part, because it concerned the spell itself. After all, the spell communicated with humans in one of those dead languages. By knowing the language, he was able to understand the message's deeper meanings. The simplest example of this was Nephis and her true name, Changing Star. While technically correct, this translation failed to properly convey the exact meaning, which meant that while the other sleepers were still in the dark as to what her aspect was, Sunny had clues. By understanding the grammatical structure of the rune language, it was easy to extrapolate and see that the correct translation would have technically been Star of Change. On top of that, it turned out that there were different runes for the word change, each with its own connotation. Depending on what exact rune was used to relay the meaning of the name, it could also mean ruinous star or star of misfortune. A small change in wording and connotation could mean a world of difference in real life. Sunny, who had never seriously studied before, found the process of acquiring vast amounts of theoretical knowledge strange, numbing, and exhausting. But it was also exhilarating. Knowledge was something that only the privileged had access to, and now Sunny was considered one of them, at least so long as he managed to stay alive. While he was new to academia, he quickly picked up on a sobering fact, one he wished he realized sooner. It was also this authority over knowledge that kept them in positions of power, creating a vicious cycle of inequality. The poor had no opportunity to study, and without the advantage of a good education, they had no way out of their circumstances. If they could study, they could at least maybe reach the bare minimum requirements for most jobs, but for so much of his life, that was so far out of reach in even his wildest dreams. But now, Sonny was one of those privileged people. More than that, he was at the pinnacle of social hierarchy. Not only had he gained access to an unlimited amount of knowledge, but even his basic needs like food and shelter were also taken care of by the government, allowing him to fully focus on the single goal of developing himself as an awakened. This sudden transformation would have sent him into a whirlpool of philosophical reflection if he had any time to spare. But that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. When he didn't have classes, Teacher Julius insisted on holding practical lessons every other day. Even if some of them had to be done in virtual reality simulations, he insisted on using the full immersion stations, which enhanced physical feedback. As a result, Sonny was bone-tired and utterly exhausted. The good thing was that with such an amount of exercise, coupled with his newly reforged body, Sonny had never been in better shape. Even without combat training, he could feel his strength, stamina, and agility improving by leaps and bounds. The peculiar rebirth he had experienced after completing the first nightmare had enhanced the innate potential of his body, bringing it to the peak of the human condition. But now it was up to him to realize that potential, with sweat, effort, and a lot of hard work. Practical application of wilderness survival techniques provided him with the opportunity to do so. By day, he was a proper student, taking on a full course load and additional study and practice in an attempt to make up for lost time. But by night, Sonny secretly collected information about other sleepers and practiced shadow control while most of the others were relaxing, socializing, or sleeping. His shadow was independent enough to be sent on scouting missions without his direct control. It would sneak here and there, listening in on the conversations and observing different classes where sleepers had to demonstrate their aspect abilities. Then, after Sonny had finished his supper and returned to his room, it would come back and share everything it had heard and seen during the day. The only problem with this arrangement was that the shadow, despite its outward snarkiness, turned out to be rather naive. It didn't quite understand how the human world worked, and as such, often failed to distinguish between useful information and meaningless chatter. Most nights, Sonny received nothing of value. Not really. His shadow would prattle on with the latest academy gossip. Sonny listened, trying to find anything useful in these information dumps, and fought against the sleep that pulled at his bones. This was how he learned that in the Sleeper Academy, romance was in the air. It wasn't all that shocking. There were 100 beautiful young people locked underground in close proximity to each other, with the added spice of a deathly threat hanging over their heads. Many felt that life was short, and it was their time to seize the day. Passion bloomed in the shadow of approaching danger. Sonny felt like a complete outsider to this side of academic life. He had already positioned himself to be perceived as an unlikable lunatic, which didn't help with finding any romantic prospects. But even if he had wanted to, he simply had no time for anything except his lessons and training. And even if he wanted to, he knew deep down that that would be a terrible idea. He was wary of getting too close to anybody, afraid that a situation would arise where he would have no choice but to divulge his true name. His nights were full up anyway. He was busy enough with gathering information and slowly learning about the scope and details of various aspect abilities, and to a lesser extent, flaws. He was also working on developing and experimenting with his shadow control. The results had been very promising. He quickly found out that his shadow was able to enhance various objects outside of just his body. If it wrapped itself around a weapon, the weapon struck harder and delivered more powerful blows. If it was applied to an armor, the armor would become sturdier and harder to break. The enhancement was rather substantial, too. It was roughly twice as much as the initial value. All in all, this ability, if used correctly, could make him a powerhouse among the sleepers. Many combat aspects could deliver more speed or damage, and others could provide more defense and protection, but no other aspect seemed to be nearly as well-rounded and versatile as Shadow Slave. With the added utility of Shadow Sight, Shadow Step, and Shadow Scout, it was truly incredible. Just like that, day after day passed, slowly turning into weeks. Before Sunny even knew it, the winter solstice was already here. It was time for his next nightmare. On the day of the winter solstice, Sunny woke up feeling tired and drowsy. No matter how much he tried to shake off his listlessness, it wouldn't go away. In the end, he just stayed in bed for a while longer, wrapping himself in his soft, warm blanket. He was already familiar with this feeling of never-ending, ensnaring sleepiness. It was the same in the days before his first nightmare. It was also unnervingly similar to what he had experienced while slowly dying of hypothermia on the slopes of the Black Mountain. Remembering the cold embrace of approaching death, Sunny couldn't help but shiver. This was his last day on Earth, at least for a while. At least so long as he survived. By nightfall, the spell was going to take him away once again, this time to challenge the vast expanse of the dream realm. What was he going to face in that ruined magical world? Would luck be on his side this time? Or would there be another unfortunate disaster? Oh. He buried his head in his pillow. There was no point in guessing. He had already done everything in his power to prepare. He studied hard, trained hard, and kept his secret safe. His aspect was better than most, and his will to survive was long tempered by the harsh reality of the outskirts and the even harsher ordeal of the first nightmare. He was as ready as he would ever be. With a sigh, Sunny got out of bed and went along with his morning routine. If this was going to be his last hot shower in a long while, he was going to let himself enjoy it. If it was going to be his last scrumptious breakfast for the time being, if only he had no appetite. When he reached the cafeteria, it was full of sleepers, but no one was talking. Everybody was in low spirits and seemed to be unusually introspective. There was no laughter or boisterous conversations. Only the legacies seemed calm and collected. However, even they kept to themselves. Sunny thought about the last time he was preparing to enter the spell, and with a bit of trepidation, approached the coffee machine. During his stay in the academy, he had long discovered that a lot of people were in the habit of adding sugar and milk to their coffee. So on this auspicious day, he decided to finally give it another try. After all, it was nice to have a tradition, and he supposed this was his. A few minutes later, he had taken his usual seat near Cassia, the blind girl. Despite their compulsory closeness, they had not talked to each other since that first day. They remained practically strangers, forced to share the same space by circumstances beyond their control. Sunny did not see a reason for anything to change today. However, as soon as he took the first sip of coffee, Cassia suddenly turned her head and stared at him with her beautiful milky blue eyes. Unnerved, Sunny looked around, checking if someone else had attracted her attention, and after making sure that there wasn't anyone standing behind him, he asked, "What's up?" Cassia was silent, as though hesitating if she should reply, and then suddenly said, "Happy birthday." "What?" Sunny frowned, trying to comprehend the meaning behind her words. Then, in a flash of realization, it dawned on him. "Oh, right. It's my birthday today." He had completely forgotten about it. He turned 19 today. Wait, how did she know today was my birthday? Sunny gave the blind girl a strange look, opened his mouth, and then decided to let the issue go. It was just a bit too unnerving for him to want to open that conversation. Thanks." With a nod, Cassia turned away and seemingly lost interest in having a conversation once again, which was for the better. Sunny returned to his coffee, finding it not too bad this time. Of course, sugar and cream were doing most of the work. However, he did feel a little bit more awake after drinking it. 19, huh? Sunny was never sure that he would make it to this age alive, and yet despite everything, he did. If anyone had told him a year ago that he was going to celebrate his 19th birthday by drinking real coffee with real milk and sugar, he would have laughed in their face. He held his cup with more reverence, remembering that, and took a deep breath in, reveling in the rich aroma. Unwillingly, Sonny remembered all the people who used to celebrate his birthdays with him, a long time ago. Before his mood turned sour, he decisively dispelled these thoughts and forced himself to smile. "This is not bad. Let's do it again next year when I'm already an awakened." Cheering himself up like that, he finished his coffee and left the cafeteria. There were no classes today, but he still visited the wilderness survival classroom and said his goodbyes to Teacher Julius. The old man got pretty emotional when sending him off. He gave Sonny
One last tip.
a dozen or so times in a row, and even promised to push for a research assistant position to be opened after the young man had become a full awakened. Sonny left, thanking him for his time and patience. After that, there wasn't much to do. When the sun was close to setting, Awakened Rock gathered them in the foyer of the sleeping center and led them outside. In the snowy parks that surrounded the white building, other Awakened were leading their own batches of sleepers to the same destination. It was the Academy's medical center. The center looked more like a shrine than a hospital. The interior contained both highly advanced technology as well as some of the best healers among the Awakened. For the duration of their first journey into the dream realm, the bodies of the sleepers would be kept safe in specifically designed pods and sustained by the magical powers of those healers if anything unfortunate were to happen on the other side of the spell. Of course, whether or not they would wake up in the end wholly depended on the sleepers themselves. To Sonny's surprise, after entering the medical center, Instructor Rock did not take them directly to the wing containing sleeper pods. Instead, he led them to a deserted floor and then opened the doors to a spacious gallery that was illuminated by the beautiful crimson rays of the setting sun. There, they saw rows and rows of wheelchairs. In each wheelchair, there was a person with a blank, strangely peaceful expression on their face. All these people were completely silent, motionless, and still. They did not show any reaction to the appearance of guests. They all seemed to be empty. In the eerie silence, Sonny felt his hair standing up and a creeping terror seeping deep into his bones. Instructor Rock looked at the empty people with solemn eyes.
There is a reason I brought you all here. Look well and remember, some of you may know who these people are. For those of you who don't, they are called the Hollow.
He gritted his teeth and then continued.
Each one of them was once either a sleeper or an awakened. Some of them were weak, and some of them were strong. Some were even incredibly powerful. All of them have perished in the dream realm.
Their souls are gone, Sonny realized, horrified.
If you're lucky, once your spirit is destroyed, your body dies with it. If not, you'll become just like them, hollow.
Instructor Rock glanced in the direction where Castor and Nephis stood, and then added,
So don't die out there.
Half an hour later, sleepers had been led to private rooms to change and prepare to enter the pods. In one of the rooms, the blind girl Cassia was orienting herself in the unfamiliar space, touching the walls and strange pieces of machinery with her hands. She was already dressed and ready, but was busying herself, steeling herself for the impending trial before her. Despite her calm expression, tears were streaming down her beautiful doll-like face. In the other room, proud Legacy Castor was staring listlessly at the floor. His lips were moving, repeating one strange phrase over and over again. He was trembling. In another room, Changing Star Nephis, the last daughter of the Immortal Flame Clan, was looking down at her hands. Underneath her skin, Soft white radiance was slowly growing brighter and brighter. Her face was contorted in a grimace of harrowing agony. Finally, there was a room where Shadow Slave, sunless, lost from light, turned away from the sleeping pod and glanced down at his shadow. "Well, are you ready?" The shadow shrugged and didn't answer. Yeah, me too." With that, he stepped forward and climbed into the pod. He lay there in silence. Then suddenly, in the vast echoing darkness, he heard that voice, the spell.
Welcome to the Dream Realm, Sunless.
Sunny was expecting to first look at the place where his arrival to the Dream Realm was going to take place from above, just like it had happened at the beginning of the first nightmare. That ordeal had started with a whirlwind view. Time had magically moved in reverse, giving him an opportunity to see hints of what he was going to face. This time was woefully different. Immediately after hearing the greetings of the spell, Sunny found himself drowning in a bottomless black void. As he instinctively tried to open his mouth to scream, salty water rushed inside, making him choke and twitch. He couldn't see anything. No, it's not that he couldn't see. It's just that there was no source of light around. Usually darkness wasn't a problem for Sunny, but for some reason, his sight wasn't working anymore. Maybe the seawater he was submerged in was blocking it. If it wasn't for the special space perception that the affinity to shadows gave him, he would not have known which way was up or down. With its help, he barely managed to orient himself as he furiously kicked his legs through the water. Luckily, Teacher Julius's lessons had included swimming. Swearing to thank both the old man and Master Jet once he came back, Sunny forced himself to remain calm. "Just kick your legs. Don't think, just move." After a few long and tense seconds, his head finally broke through the surface of the water. Sunny gasped, sucking in a deep, hoarse breath. "Breathe. Breathe. You're still alive." Whew. After sucking in enough air to soothe his burning lungs, Sunny carefully spun in the water, trying to take in his surroundings. What met him was an endless jet-black expanse of undulating waves. Above him was an empty black sky. There was no moon, no stars, just a black void of nothing. Sunny blinked a few times, cold dread taking hold of his heart. "This is a sea? An ocean? Was I dropped in the middle of an ocean?" No, it couldn't be. There had to be solid ground somewhere nearby. As he was gripped by a momentary panic, a sudden splashing sound drew his attention. Sunny turned around and saw a triangular dorsal fin moving in his direction. Luckily, it was still hundreds and hundreds of meters away. "Wait, if it's so far away, then how come I can see it so clearly?" Sunny felt goosebumps erupt across his skin, and it wasn't just from the icy water he was submerged in. By his estimation, that dorsal fin was at least 5 meters tall. It was rapidly approaching, growing visibly larger with each second. "Damn you, spell!" With eyes full of horror, Sunny spun again, desperately trying to find something, anything to save him. There! He spotted something. A short distance away, he noticed a black mass protruding slightly above the water. Not wasting even a second on thinking, he started to swim, his arms and legs burning as he made his way towards the black mass. He managed to gain considerable speed, but it didn't seem to be enough. The giant shadow of the unknown creature closed in on him. A small part of Sunny's mind managed to preserve its rationality, even when faced with this boundless primal fear. Not allowing himself to slip entirely into panic, Sunny tried to think, and then silently commanded his own shadow to wrap itself around his body. Instantly, his speed increased twofold. just seconds before the unknown colossus got to him. Sonny reached the black mass, stretched out his hands, and pulled himself out of the water. Ugh. Ugh. He rolled away from the edge, scratching his skin on the uneven rocks, and jumped in fright when the ground underneath him shuddered as though something massive had collided with it. As Sonny backed away from the water's edge, terrifying jaws rose out of the water with rows and rows of giant teeth, each one as long as he was tall. His eyes widened as he took in his surroundings and realized that the rock he had climbed onto was nowhere near large enough to keep him out of reach from the monster. Why is it even trying to eat me? I'm too small to be considered a snack for something this enormous. Before the monster had a chance to attack, a colossal tentacle suddenly broke through the water and rose into the air like a strange undulating black tower. And suddenly, as it appeared, it started to fall, entangling the monster and pulling it back under the water. Sonny lost the feeling in his legs and plopped on the ground, his mouth open. His whole body shook. A few moments later, the dark sea was calm again, as though nothing had happened. The indifferent waves continued to move silently under the lightless sky. So it wasn't trying to eat me, he realized, frozen. It was trying to run away. Sonny let time slip by, allowing himself the chance to rest, catch his breath, and calm his nerves. He was fairly certain that nothing else was going to immediately devour him. He had finally managed to stop trembling, and he stood up to start exploring his surroundings. The black mass he climbed onto turned out to be a single stone platform of around 12 meters in diameter. Its surface was mostly flat, covered with grooves, and was somewhat dry. Due to the regular shape of its edges, it seemed more like something man-made than a natural formation. But then again, here in the dream realm, it was hard to be sure that something man-made was actually made by humans, as opposed to... better not to think about it. The platform wasn't connected to anything, existing as a tiny island in the sea of darkness. There wasn't anything else above the water for as far as Sonny was able to see. After discovering that fact, he also realized something else. It was that he was wet, cold, and completely naked. In his defense, the clothing situation was the last thing one would think about when trying to save themselves from terrifying monsters. Also, it's not like someone was here to witness his stark paleness and private bits, so embarrassment was not even a factor. Still, it was cold. Sonny summoned the puppeteer's shroud and watched as dark gray garments covered his body. It even came with a pair of high, soft-soled leather boots. Clad in gray fabric and lusterless leather, he suddenly felt much safer, not to mention warm. Sonny sat back down in the middle of the platform, as far away from water as he could, and tried to remember the unique characteristic of every explored region in the dream realm he had reviewed in his studies. Nothing Teacher Julius had mentioned in his classes matched this starless dark void. Of course not, he thought with a bit of resentment. Even if some unlucky humans had ever come here, I doubt that they were able to return to the real world alive. Not with those things hiding underwater. Not yet desperate enough to leave the platform and try to swim away in search of land, Sonny decided to wait and see. Maybe something was going to change as time went by. With a soft sigh, he sat and looked for his shadow. Unfortunately, due to the total darkness that surrounded him, it couldn't really be seen. He just barely felt its presence. This must be a paradise for you, right? All this gloom and not a star in sight? The shadow, of course, did not answer. Anyway, good job earlier. With a nod, Sonny lay down, using his hands as a pillow. He figured he should use this time to rest. He focused on his breathing to help keep any nervous thoughts at bay as he stared into the black sky and waited. The sound of the undulating waves was actually quite relaxing. After a while, he closed his eyes and listened. Minutes merged together, growing into hours. Suddenly, Sonny caught a slight change in the sound of the sea. It was as though something was shifting. He opened his eyes and noticed that one corner of the sky was slowly turning gray. Soon, a glimpse of a pale sun rose above the horizon. A new day had come to the starless void, and with it, the dark sea suddenly surged. The black, opaque water suddenly surged and seethed, as though it was a living creature desperately trying to avoid the pale light of the coming dawn. Sonny slowly rose, and after some thought, carefully approached the edge of the stone platform. Looking down, he blinked and then kneeled to make sure that what he saw wasn't an illusion. The sea seemed to be receding, slowly at first, and then faster and faster. The water level was dropping. The circular stone formation he had been taking shelter on used to barely protrude out of the waves, but now there were meters and meters of wet rock between him and the restless surface of the sea. As the sun climbed up, the monstrous ebbing tide continued. Soon, Sonny found himself standing on the edge of a tall cliff, with 100-meter drop separating him from the churning waters beneath him. The rock formation broadened and changed shape. However, from his vantage point, it was hard to determine what that shape was. It was then that he noticed that the dark surface of the water began to be punctured here and there by sharp crimson blades. As the water dropped even further, it was as though a crimson forest was slowly rising from the black depths. The trees were made of something resembling coral, growing chaotically into each other and stretching toward the sky. They were colossal, with irregular protrusions entwining and merging together, looking monumental and eerie on the black and red rock of the sunlit void. A labyrinth formed from the strange reef, and it stretched as far as Sonny could see, broken here and there by protruding cliffs, sudden chasms, and distant natural features. Half an hour later, utterly shocked, Sonny stared down and realized that the sea was completely gone. If not for the black seaweed left hanging on wet rocks and scarlet pillars of coral, he would have questioned if it had ever really been there. His small circular island had turned into the peak of a strange, towering, irregularly shaped cliff. Looking down, he felt his head spin. The night had already fully retreated, letting morning finally take its place. "I'm not seeing things, am I?" Sonny thought, pinching himself. Despite the sudden disappearance of the dark sea and its hidden monsters, Sonny was in no rush to climb down from his circular stone platform. He felt that if the sea was able to disappear, it was surely able to come back, possibly at any moment. He did not know what dangers the coral labyrinth could be hiding. Perhaps there was something even scarier than the owner of the giant tentacle. But that did not mean that he wasn't going to explore. Coming back to his spot in the middle of the platform, Sonny sat down and commanded his shadow to separate itself from his body. Thanking the sun above him, he took control of his shadow and had it approach the edge of the platform. Then it nimbly slid down. Habitually moving from one shadow to another, he began the descent. At this moment, Sonny was glad that shadows had no weight and were not affected by gravity. While the shadow was busy climbing down, Sonny yawned. "Say, don't you think that you need a name?" Although his shadow was already too far away to hear him, they were still able to communicate through their shared psychic connection. Of course, that did not necessarily mean his shadow would respond. His shadow was sort of taciturn, mostly because it didn't have vocal cords and was unable to speak. Plus, it had a bit of a temper. "How about shameless?" "No." "What about shady?" "Also no." "What about something simpler like What? Well, do you have suggestions then? All right. We'll shelve this conversation for later. By the time he was done with the short, one-sided conversation, the shadow had already reached the bottom of the cliff. The range of his shadow control was not limitless, but it was just barely enough to explore his nearest surroundings. As his shadow entered the labyrinth, Sonny found it to be extremely disorienting. The paths between coral pillars were sometimes broad, sometimes narrow. They twisted and turned without any logic, often leading to dead ends or even back to where he started. More so, some paths tunneled through the coral mounds, turning into dark passageways with no view of what may lay on the other side. The labyrinth was vast and multi-layered, making Sonny's head hurt after multiple fruitless attempts to memorize the layout of the nearest pathways. In the end, he brought his shadow back up, forcing it to climb on top of the crimson forest and start jumping from one sharp coral blade to another, knowing full well that he himself would not be able to do the same. Soon, he circled the strange cliff and froze, scared by the sight of what was happening in its shadow. There, the corpse of the giant shark-like creature that had briefly pursued him the previous night was laying on the ground. The pillars of coral around it were shattered and broken. The closer his shadow got to it, the better its view of the beast got. That was when Sonny realized that the whole beast wasn't there. Only half of it was. With its grotesque innards spilling out of what remained of its tail, the viscera stretched out, far off into the distance. The other half of the creature was gone. Around the corpse, hundreds of smaller monsters were scurrying, tearing away and devouring its flesh, bit by bit. Each of them was about 2.5 meters tall, looking like a weird, nightmarish mix of a demonic crab and a centaur. They had 4 pairs of long, segmented legs that ended in scythe-like protrusions. At the front, a human-like torso was protruding from the carapace, also clad in thick, chitinous armor. The head, if it was even the appropriate word, was situated directly on top of the torso, with no neck in between. It had 2 narrow eye slits and a vicious-looking mouth with several slimy mandibles. Instead of hands, the monsters had 2 enormous pincers. Currently, they were all using those pincers to tear chunks of meat off the desiccated corpse and stuff them into their mouths. From time to time, a fight for an especially juicy piece of meat would break out, ending up in a few monsters being torn apart and quickly devoured by the victors. Sonny gulped. The sight of heavily armored, powerful monsters made him nervous. But also, looking at them feasting, strangely enough, made him feel suddenly ravenously hungry. Each of them seems like trouble, and there are hundreds of them. His luck, like always, was awful. At least I don't have to wonder why the labyrinth feels so empty. All the inhabitants are having a lovely dinner party. Feeling a little bit apprehensive about turning his shadow's back to the monsters, Sonny commanded it to look back and study the cliff he was taking shelter atop. Something about it was making him feel uneasy. The shadow turned around and looked up, taking in the sight of the strange cliff. It took Sonny a few minutes to shift his perspective and recognize it for what it was. That's a finger. That's a hand. That is a sword? He blinked. It's a statue. Indeed, the cliff was man-made. It was an ancient, colossal statue, at least 200 meters tall. The scale of it was so massive that it boggled the mind. From what Sonny could see, it depicted a knight clad in elaborate plate armor, with 7 shining stars carved into his breastplate. In his hands, he was holding a gargantuan sword, which was pointed towards the ground. The most striking thing about it, however, was that the giant stone knight was missing his head. The roughly circular platform Sonny was standing on turned out to be the top of his neck. And by the looks of it, the head wasn't missing by design. It was as though something, or someone, had violently torn it off at some point in the distant past. Sonny walked around the platform, looking down from all sides, but didn't notice the head laying anywhere near. What on earth is this place? Without any hints to find the answer, he led his shadow back to the giant's neck and settled at the western edge of it, studying the feasting monsters. He didn't move until the sun was about to set. Just as Sonny expected, as soon as the sun touched the horizon, a deafening rumble could be heard coming from somewhere below. The monsters instantly stopped their feast and scurried away, some hiding inside the coral pillars, some simply burying themselves in the soft sand. A few minutes later, the first streams of black water appeared in the labyrinth. Their volume quickly grew, and soon an apocalyptic flood devoured everything. The sea was returning with the approach of night. Sonny stared at this unimaginable process, thoughts churning in his head. In an hour, the circular platform was the only thing above the dark waters once again. With an empty stomach and a head full of thoughts, Sonny returned to the center of the platform and sat down. After a while, he beckoned to his shadow and said, "Wake me up if anything happens." Then he closed his eyes and tried to fall asleep. His consciousness quickly slid into the sweet embrace of darkness, giving Sonny some well-needed rest. In the middle of the night, however, a sudden impulse stirred him awake. Sonny jumped to his feet, his groggy mind full of tense apprehension. He was afraid that the owner of the giant tentacle had come back to finish the job, or maybe some other horror from the depths had sensed him and decided to snack on human meat. However, the sea was quiet and calm. He didn't hear any abnormalities around the night statue. "What is it?" Sonny whispered, addressing the shadow. The shadow silently pointed him in a particular direction. Turning his head, Sonny squinted. He quickly understood why it was a good idea to wake up. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to see. Out there in the distance, a few kilometers away, a small orange light was shimmering in the darkness. Its reflections were rising and falling with the movement of the waves. It was too far away to make out any details, so Sonny just stared at it for a while. Pretty soon, the light disappeared. Other sleepers? Natural phenomenon? Or some monster laying a trap? Images of nightmarish deep-water creatures immediately came to mind. Shaking his head, Sonny lay back down and attempted to return to his slumber. However, this time sleep escaped him. Pangs of hunger were not quite unbearable, but they were slowly becoming more and more intense. The thirst, however, was worse. In the end, he remained awake up until the sun rose again, sending the dark sea in retreat. As soon as the morning came, the pincer monsters crawled back from their hiding spots and rushed to the giant carcass to continue their feast. Sonny watched them for some time, and then walked to the opposite side of the platform to take a look in the direction where he had seen the mysterious light the previous night. At a considerable distance from the headless statue, only a few miles away, the ground rose naturally and formed something akin to a small hill. On top of that hill, an especially massive coral pillar rose to the sky. From the looks of it, the upper branches were just high enough to stay above the water at night. Various ideas stormed into Sonny's head, but at the end of it, only two questions were really important. First of all, would he be able to find the way through the labyrinth and cover that distance during the day? And second, and more importantly, should he even attempt to do it? After all, there was no indication that the source of the mysterious light was something beneficial, as opposed to dreadful and deadly. Not having enough information to make a choice, Sonny settled back to study the monsters. He did, however, send the shadow to investigate, as far into the labyrinth as the range of the shadow control allowed, hoping to chart at least the beginning of the path that could potentially lead him to that hill. Logically speaking, he was as safe atop the headless statue as he probably could be in this strange place. The only problem was, he was going to die soon because of thirst or hunger. Both problems were solvable if he were to venture down. He could desalinate the seawater in a few different ways thanks to the lessons of Teacher Julius. The materials he needed were present pretty much everywhere in the Dream Realm. He could also prepare traps and hunt a pincer monster to eat. With their massive size, just one of them would be enough to feed him for weeks. He could easily see such a routine, hunting by day, returning to the statue at the approach of the night. It was probably his safest choice. However, this way of doing things lacked one vital element: the potential for improvement. It was well suited for keeping Sonny alive, but had no way of giving him hope. If he was destined to spend the rest of his life in the small area surrounding the headless statue, devouring monsters and trembling at night in fear of being devoured by something bigger in turn, well, he would rather just jump down and end it right now. The spell would keep him trapped here until he progressed, spinning his wheels in an endless routine. He wasn't sure where that would leave him. That pretty much meant that the only choice left for him was to try and reach the source of the orange light. And if Sonny was really trying to attempt it, he had to do it before the pincer monsters were done consuming the giant carcass. That way, at least, the surrounding segment of the labyrinth was going to be free of them. Firm in his choice, Sonny decided to leave the headless statue the next morning. He would spend the rest of today exploring paths through the labyrinth and preparing himself mentally. With that, he closed his eyes and concentrated his perception on the moving shadow. As night fell, a sudden storm descended upon the dark sea. Sonny was stirred awake by the shadow in time to prepare himself for the crushing winds and the pelting rain. Rain used to put Sonny in a bad mood, but this time, he was too thirsty to think about anything except for fresh water. Staying low enough to not be blown over the edge of the platform, Sonny cupped his hands and waited until they filled with rainwater. Then he raised them to his mouth and greedily drank. Strikes of lightning illuminated everything above the churning sea. If anyone were to see Sonny now, they would have noticed a wide grin on his face. The storm continued to rampage for several hours. Sonny crouched in the middle of the platform, enduring its rage. More than once, a tall wave would crash into the headless knight's neck, threatening to wash him away. But Sonny held tight to the deep grooves in the stone surface of the platform, sticking to it like glue. By morning, when the storm finally dissipated, all of his muscles were sore. But there was no time to waste. As soon as the monsters came back to the carcass, with a few stragglers quickly following behind, he slid over the edge of the platform and began to nimbly climb down. Sonny had to thank wilderness survival classes once again, since he had been taught the basics of rock climbing as well. Teacher Julius was adamant about giving his students a crash course in all possible forms of traversal. Sonny had already scouted the optimal way down and memorized the best holds and indentations to grab onto with the help of his shadow. Soon, his feet finally touched the ground. Even though leaving the safety of the headless statue was going to put him in considerable danger, Sonny instantly felt his mood improving. He had a goal now. Remaining passive for the last couple of days did not suit his character well. Now, even if his plan ended in abject failure, at least he was going to go down doing something that he had decided to do. Trying and failing was better than not trying at all. The black mud was deep enough to slow him down, but not to the extent he had been afraid of. With some practice, Sonny was soon able to walk at an acceptable speed. As long as he stuck to the shadows and the edges of the coral, his steps were long and silent, producing no squelching noises from the mud. He headed for one of the paths that were supposed to lead him to the distant hill and entered the cool shade of the Crimson Labyrinth. Immediately, a strange feeling enveloped his mind. It was as though the world beyond the labyrinth did not exist anymore, and all that was left were its twisting dark paths. This thing seems endless. It can't be, but... Shaking his head, Sonny sent the shadow to scout ahead, hoping to be notified of any latent danger in advance, and began to move forward. His life now depended on whether or not he would reach the distant hill before the sun began to set, and the tide rolled in once again. He didn't even want to think about what would happen if he were still inside the labyrinth once the dark sea came back in an unstoppable flood. The shadow moved ahead of him, not meeting any hurdles. Sometimes it would climb high to scout the direction of different paths, allowing Sonny to choose the optimal route most of the time. However, he still had to backtrack a considerable distance once or twice, ending up either in a dead end or on a path leading in the wrong direction. Despite that, everything seemed to be going smoothly. Sonny even had time to carefully study the interior of the labyrinth, noticing more details of its composition, as well as a frightening amount of unrecognizable bones hiding in the mud beneath his feet. Because of how well things were going, he lowered his guard a little. His arrogance was also to blame. With his extensive preparations and skillful control of the Shadow Scout, Sonny subconsciously patted himself on the shoulder and assumed that everything was going to be fine. That's why, when the mud directly in front of him started to move, he was a fraction of a second late to react. In the next moment, a massive pincer shot out of the ground and tore through the air. It narrowly missed him as it snapped shut, threatening to cut his body in half with one crushing strike. Shit! This was the only thought in Sonny's head as he fell backward, crashing into the mud, allowing the pincer to close right in front of his face with a loud clash. The jagged, chitinous blades were so close that he could clearly see bits of sand sticking to their surface. Sonny landed on his back, narrowly avoiding the unexpected strike. The good thing was that he managed to avoid being injured or even killed. The bad thing was that he was sprawled on the ground and able to quickly create distance between him and the attacker. The massive pincer was still hovering above. Just as this realization dawned on Sonny, he desperately rolled to the side. In the next moment, the pincer lunged down, sending small tremors through the mud. If not for his quick reaction, Sonny's chest would have been caved in by that blow. He was just beginning to stand up when the pincer swiped sideways. Luckily, Sonny was ready. Instead of trying to dodge or block the attack, he moved with it, letting the pincer collide with his outstretched hands and cushioning the blow. As his arm screamed in pain, Sonny used the force of the blow and allowed his body to be sent flying through the air. This way, at least he would get out of the pincer's range. He might not have been taught how to fight, but one thing he knew very well was how to fall. Instead of breaking his neck or having the breath beaten out of him by the landing, he braced his body and nimbly rolled before stopping some distance away from the ambushing monster. "I take it back," Sonny thought, remembering his sarcastic critique of Gregor's battle rolls. "Rolling is an integral part of any respectable monster fighting technique." Then he looked up, trying to ascertain the situation. In front of him, the attacker had finally shown itself in full. It crawled out from under the mud, casting a vast shadow over kneeling Sonny. Its tiny eyes were full of rage, hunger, and malice. It was one of the pincer monsters he had spent so much time observing. Towering over him at almost 3 meters in height, the bulky creature moved its mandibles and produced a jarring, piercing screech. "Why aren't you devouring the giant carcass with the rest of your buddies, you crab bastard?" However, the answer to Sonny's indignant plea was rather obvious. The monster seemed to be in rather bad shape. Half its 8 scythe-like legs were broken, and there were cracks in its thick carapace, each oozing with viscous azure blood. It was also missing one of its 2 pincer arms, which looked like it had been torn off entirely at the shoulder. If not for this pathetic state, the creature would not have needed to hide in the mud, hoping to catch easy prey. It could have just followed the other monsters and joined on the feast. Sonny was just unlucky to stumble directly upon its ambush. He had relied too much on the scouting abilities of his shadow, forgetting that it wasn't much more observant than an awakened human. It was also weightless and inaudible. That's why the monster did not react when the shadow had passed over its trap a moment earlier. On the other hand, Sonny could also consider himself lucky. By the same logic, he would not have been able to dodge the creature's sudden attack if not for its crippled, slowed state. But pondering on his luck could wait for later. Right now, Sonny had a far more pressing thing to do: survive.
Get back here!
He ordered the shadow and jumped to the side. In the next second, the space he occupied a moment before was torn apart by the attacking monster. Its heavy pincer crashed into the side of a coral pillar, sending crimson shards flying in every direction. Sonny caught his balance and continued moving. He was hoping that the bulky, heavily armored, wounded creature would not be able to match his speed, but unfortunately, it turned out to be surprisingly agile. Its scythe-like legs pierced the mud behind him, and the pincer was already flying through the air again, threatening to decapitate Sonny at any second. Sonny ducked, dodging the pincer, and finally caught a second of reprieve. His eyes darted around, desperately searching for something to use as a weapon. Almost instantly, he noticed a long, smooth, sharp bone left behind by some unknown creature sticking out of the mud. Without slowing down, he bent down and grabbed it, pulling the bone out with one forceful tug. The bone was almost 5 feet long, ending in a narrow, sharp tip. It was almost like a spear. The problem was, even with the added length of this makeshift spear, Sonny's range of attack was still shorter than the monster's. He also doubted that it was capable of piercing the hard carapace. In short, he had to get close and aim for one of the cracks in the creature's armor. However, he didn't dare to. At that short of a distance, the monster could easily crush him into a paste by just using its weight and hulking frame. But then, a crazy idea entered Sonny's mind. A bit shocked, he momentarily couldn't decide whether it was a product of audacity or foolishness. Either way, he wasn't insane enough to actually consider it. At that moment, the pincer lashed out again. This time, Sonny was a little late to evade, and as a result, a sharp pain pierced his left leg. It was grazed by the edge of the pincer. The puppeteer's shroud held, not allowing the monster to draw blood, but the force of the impact was enough to throw Sonny tumbling to the ground. There was no time to recover. As his eyes opened wide, Sonny understood that he was out of other options. It was the harebrained crazy option, or death. So instead of trying to dodge, he stopped moving and allowed the monster to grab him across his torso with the pincer. Immediately, a terrible pressure descended on his ribs. Sonny felt as though he was going to be split apart, but his armor, received from defeating an awakened tyrant, resisted the crushing bite of the monster's pincer. Every muscle in his body tensed, delaying the moment when his insides would be turned into mush. In the next second, Sonny's shadow fell from above, wrapping itself around the puppeteer's shroud. With the protective properties of the enhanced armor, he was able to better resist the pincer's pulverizing embrace. Sonny and the monster appeared to be at an impasse. The young man couldn't free himself from the monster's grip, while the monster could not kill the prey by cutting it in halves with its pincer. They stared at each other. Then, an insane fire ignited in the creature's eyes. It clicked its mandibles and raised Sonny in the air, bringing him closer to its mouth, obviously intent on biting his head off. Sonny didn't struggle as the monster brought him close to its mandibles. He knew he only had one chance to live. In the last moment, Sonny allowed the shadow to flow from the puppeteer's shroud onto the sharp bone he was still clenching in his hand. Then he gathered all his strength, leaned forward, and thrust the bone forward with as much power as he could. Guided by his hand, the dark bone spear shot forward and pierced through the creature's tiny eye, sinking in deep. The other eye of the monster squeezed shut in pain as an ear-splitting screech tore from its maw. Gritting his teeth from the unbearable pain in his ribs, Sonny twisted the bone, trying to do as much damage to the creature's brain as possible. For a couple of seconds, nothing happened. Then, he felt the pressure on his body diminishing. The pincer opened, letting Sonny fall down. As he hit the mud, the hulking monster crashed to the ground too. The bone spear was still sticking from its head, bathed in the streams of azure liquid. Sonny moaned and drew in a raspy, painful breath.
You have slain an awakened beast, Carapace Scavenger. You have received a memory, Azure Blade. Your shadow is now stronger.
Sonny was sprawled in the mud, trying to catch his breath. The subtle voice of the spell echoed in his ears.
Your shadow is growing stronger.
Immediately, he felt a slight change. His body grew a little bit stronger, his vision a little sharper, his skin a little smoother. The change was minimal, but apparent. What was that? He had a guess, and it was easy to confirm. Sonny summoned the runes. Shadow fragments, 14 out of 1,000. Previously, he only had 12 of the mysterious shadow fragments, with no knowledge of how to acquire more. Now it seemed the process was automatic. He only had to kill an enemy to absorb a part of their shadow and enhance his own core. More than that, the number of fragments he was able to receive wasn't directly correlated to the number of slain enemies. After a bit of thinking, Sonny came to the preliminary conclusion. Dormant soul cores gave him 1 fragment, while awakened ones gave him 2. However, only enemies he defeated directly, more or less, counted. Killing the Mountain King's larva, a dormant beast, had given him 1 shadow fragment. Finishing off the veteran slaver, a dormant human, another. Mountain King itself was an awakened tyrant, which meant that it had 5 awakened cores, with each giving Sonny 2 shadow fragments. He ended up with a total of 12, and now, after killing the Carapace Scavenger, he had 14. Interestingly, he didn't receive any fragments from the deaths of Benny, Fraser, and Gregor, even though they perished as a result of his machinations. It seems he had to finish an enemy off with his own 2 hands to absorb a part of their shadow. Well, that, or at least by summoning an ancient dead god. The process was quite similar to how normal awakened increased their power, with the only difference being that the steps of extracting and consuming the corresponding material, soul shards, were skipped in favor of instant absorption. That meant that shadow fragments could not be stored and subsequently could not be bought or traded. He won't have an opportunity to receive them as a reward for completing missions, providing services, or selling various spoils. If Sonny wanted to grow stronger, his only option was to fight and kill. No peaceful life for me, I guess. Previously, Sonny thought that he at least had the choice to choose a relatively safe path. Many awakened never left the confines of human citadels and never faced nightmare creatures, choosing instead to perform various jobs in the dream realm just as they would in the real world. They received payments in the form of soul shards, which were simultaneously the fuel of one's progression and the universal currency inside the citadels. Sonny was never set on pursuing such a life, but not even having a choice was sort of irritating. Luckily, there was a bright side to this. Without the need to use soul shards to strengthen his core, he would be able to spend everything he earned freely and without concern. After all, after he kills an enemy and absorbs the shadow fragments, the soul shard would still be there, ready to be collected and exchanged for something Sonny might need in the future. That would effectively make him twice as efficient in terms of earning and spending. which was no small advantage. And then there was the matter of the Shadow Core. Since both Sunny and his shadow were tied to it, strengthening the core would not only increase Sunny's power, but also enhance the Shadow's. So if he were to use it to further empower himself, the actual effect would be stacked, producing a twofold enhancement. So for each shadow fragment he collected, Sunny would actually be able to reap twice as much benefit as an awakened would from a soul shard. Not bad. Not bad at all. For once, the future seemed bright, provided he survived and got the opportunity to even have a future, of course. Sitting up, Sunny moved his eyes and found the cluster of runes describing his memories. Azure Blade. Had he finally gotten a weapon? Memory, Azure Blade. Memory rank, Awakened. Memory type, Weapon. Memory description. On this forgotten shore, only steel remembers. Huh. Interesting. Not very informative, but interesting. Sunny summoned his new weapon, and a sharp, light sword immediately appeared in his hand. It was about 1 meter long, including the handle. The blade was straight and single-edged, ending in an angular tip. It was forged out of azure steel, with a beautiful layered pattern. Deep inside the steel, white sparks could be seen. The crossguard was minimalistic and simple, offering almost no protection to the wielder's hands. Sunny wasn't too familiar with weapons, given that he spent his time in the academy focused on survival skills, but from what he could tell of the sword, it appeared to be like a katana, meaning it was probably meant for slashing and cutting, as opposed to piercing, and that the handle was long enough to accommodate 2 hands. Also, the sword was beautiful in its construction and design. The azure of the steel sparkled in the light. It was dazzling. He summoned the shadow and made it wrap itself around the azure blade. Immediately the steel became bluish black, with a scattering of white sparks. It looked like a starlit night sky. Sunny stood up and waved the sword a couple of times, getting accustomed to its weight. The sharp edge whistled as it cut the air. Well, at least now I finally look like a real awakened. He cast a gaze at the corpse of the Carapace scavenger and grimaced. This part was not going to be pleasant. Yeah. After a bit of hard work, strain, and sweat, he managed to break open the cracked carapace and cut away a few strips of tender pink meat. He also did not forget to extract the radiant crystal from the beast's chest, the soul shard. Without much hope, he tried to absorb the shard, remembering how it was supposed to be done. But just as he expected, nothing happened. They're really of no direct use to me. Shit. With a shrug, Sunny placed the shard and the meat in a makeshift rucksack he weaved from black seaweed, and looked up at the sun. The day was still young. He still had a good chance of making it to the distant hill before the sea came back. However, his left leg was banged up in the fight with the scavenger beast, so walking wasn't going to be as easy as it was before. He gritted his teeth and began limping forward. Hours passed. Due to his bruises and increased vigilance, Sunny's progress slowed down considerably. He was sweating and grinding his teeth, feeling pain with each step. What's worse, the further he reached into the labyrinth, the more confusing and entangled the paths became. Even with the shadow's help, he constantly had to backtrack and struggled to move in the right direction. Crap. If nothing changed, Sunny wasn't going to reach his goal, which meant that he would be crushed to death by the returning sea, or, mercifully, maybe he would drown. Not allowing himself to think about dying, Sunny tried to walk faster. However, he couldn't be too hasty. Making a wrong turn would have taken precious minutes away from him, so he had to choose the way carefully. Additionally, failing to notice another ambush could end his life directly. Shit! Just when he was beginning to feel desperate, his shadow suddenly saw something that momentarily stunned Sunny. Some distance further down the path, beyond a few turns, the corals widened, creating a small clearing. and in the middle of that clearing, someone was walking across the mud. The first thing Sunny saw was fair skin. A lot of skin. The tall, lithe girl was only dressed in a makeshift skirt and crude brassiere, both made out of seaweed. However, it didn't seem to bother her. With a calm expression, she stopped and looked back. The wind was playing with her short silver hair. It was Nephis, the changing star. In one hand, she was holding the end of a strange golden rope, and on the other end of the rope, Cassia, the blind girl, was carefully following behind. Gray sky above, black mud below, an endless sea of crimson in between. On this dreamlike backdrop, two beautiful girls were walking across the labyrinth. One was delicate and fragile, with blonde hair and cerulean, aimless eyes. She was dressed in a simple tunic, with leather sandals on her feet, and a cloak the color of sea waves draped around her shoulders. The other was tall and lithe. She had silky, silvery hair and clear gray eyes. Her revealing clothes were crudely made out of black seaweed, leaving her fair skin and athletic build exposed. She was poised, alert, and barefoot. A golden rope connected the two girls together. Wow, what a sight, Sunny thought. He suddenly regretted that he was not an artist. The picture just begged to be made into a painting. Wait, why am I thinking about that? People! I found people! His heart skipped a beat. If Nephis and Cassia were here, then the orange light from before most likely had something to do with them, which meant that they knew how to get to the tall hill, which meant that Sunny didn't have to drown to death in the high tide. So, what do I do now? He wasn't the best at ingratiating himself to other people. He was pretty much the opposite. People usually instinctively avoided him, and that was in normal circumstances. This time, however, he had spent a whole 4 weeks making sure that everyone in the academy hated his guts. Great job, Sunny. Still, he was at least useful. In this situation, an additional body was already a great boon when facing hungry monsters. And he wasn't just anyone. His ability to scout ahead alone was worth a lot. Surely they'll see that, right? Hello. Sunny stepped into the shadows and hurried to the clearing. He reached it in a minute or so, hiding and observing the two girls before making a final decision. Helping herself with a wooden staff, blind Cassia slowly approached the middle of the clearing and extended her hand, finding Nephis and touching her on the shoulder. Why did you stop? Nephis supported the blind girl and glanced at the sky. It's getting late. An awkward pause hung between the two girls. After some time, Cassia asked, So, do you think we should turn back? Yes. Sunny was a bit amused by their exchange. What is she, a strong silent type? Then he returned to his dilemma and grimaced. How do I approach them? Damn, why is this so hard? It's not like I'm trying to ask them out on a date. I mean, one of them, both of them? Oh my God, just go and say hi. But then, if he suddenly appeared out of the shadows, not at all like a creep, how high was the probability of them getting spooked and attacking him before noticing that he was not a monster? Wait, why would they... to hell with this. Deciding on the safest approach, Sunny commanded his shadow to abandon its hiding place and move to a spot where Nephis could clearly see it. He could clearly sense the shadow rolling its eyes as it obeyed the order. As soon as the shadow started to move, Nephis suddenly snapped her hand sideways. Immediately, a long sword appeared in it, cutting the air as it assumed a defensive position. Before the shadow could even take 2 steps out of its hiding spot, it was already pierced by Changing Star's gray eyes. The shadow froze. It seemed a bit startled. Cassia took a step back. Neph, what is it? Nephis didn't answer immediately. carefully observing the shadow. Then she simply said, "There's a shadow." Cassia's doll-like face paled.
A shadow? Scavengers?
The tall girl tilted her head a little.
No, it's a human shadow.
This was clearly not what Cassia expected to hear. With an expression of surprise, she asked,
A human shadow? What is it doing?
Nephis hesitated. After a while, she answered in a flat tone, "It's waving at us." After a whole minute of silence, Cassia finally found the words to react.
What?
"I said it's waving."
Yes, I know. I mean, why is it doing that?
Nephis opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I don't know. Maybe it's a distraction to lure us into a trap." At this point, Sunny decided that it was time to talk. He inhaled deeply, then said in a friendly tone,
Actually, I just sent it ahead to make sure that you don't stab me with that sword before realizing that I'm human.
Immediately, Nephis turned her head, pinpointing the exact location where Sunny was hiding in a blotch of shadows. Her sword slightly shifted, aiming at the new threat. "If you're human, why are you hiding in the shadows like a creep?"
God damn it, I'm not a creep.
Sunny choked, trying to keep his thoughts to himself, but his flaw was merciless. He had to provide an answer, and it had to be truthful.
I mean, you're changing Star Nephis. To be honest, I'm a little afraid.
Nephis did not answer. Because of her hard-to-read face, it was almost impossible to determine whether she believed him or not. However, he included her true name in his answer for a reason. If he was some monster pretending to be human, he wouldn't have known it. Luckily, Cassia was more expressive.
Are you the boy who sat with me in the cafeteria?
Sunny smiled. Meanwhile, Nephis glanced at the blind girl. "Do you know him?" Cassia nodded.
I recognize his voice. His name is Sunless. He was in second to last place in the rankings, right above me.
The tall girl frowned as if trying to remember. Then she asked, "The pervert?" The smile disappeared from Sunny's face, replaced by exasperation.
Oh, come on.
Cassia hesitated.
I think so. Hey, I'm not really a pervert, you know. I just, said a few things to a few girls. It was all a misunderstanding.
Nephis was silent for a few seconds and then finally dismissed her sword. "Okay, you can come out." Sunny limped out of the shadows, summoning his own back. It flowed to his feet and reattached itself, visibly shaking. The bastard was laughing at him. Stopping a few meters away from Nephis, he raised his hands, showing he didn't mean the girls any harm. Changing Star gave him an inquisitive look.
What happened to you?
She was referring to his limp, bruises, and overall banged-up look. Sunny sighed.
A carapace scavenger.
Nephis raised an eyebrow.
You managed to get away alive? You bet I did.
Sunny subconsciously straightened his back.
I didn't get away, I killed it.
To prove his point, he gestured at his rucksack, full of delicious monster meat. Nephis looked him over again, reevaluating her opinion of him. Now there were hints of approval in her eyes. Carapace scavengers were only beasts, but they were still awakened. With the addition of their mighty physique and natural armor, defeating one was not an easy feat for any sleeper, let alone someone from the very bottom of the ranking list. Come to think of it, it was even a bit too outstanding, almost unbelievable. Sunny lowered his eyes.
Yeah, it was already wounded.
Nephis shrugged.
A kill is a kill. You did well.
After that, she fell silent, as though not planning to say anything else. Sunny also wasn't sure what to say. Luckily, Cassia came to the rescue.
Are you seriously injured? He shook his head. No, it's just that my ribs and leg are bruised. I'll be fine in a day or two. Thankfully, my armor's pretty tough. He wasn't worried that they might be tempted to kill him to get the puppeteer's shroud. That was because memories were destroyed at the moment of their owner's death, so they only could be transferred voluntarily by a living person. Well, there was always torture and blackmail, but he doubted that any one of the two beautiful girls would stoop to that. Sonny cleared his throat. Before stumbling on the scavenger, I was heading for the tall hill with the massive coral pillar on top. But after the fight, my speed decreased. Now I'm worried about not making it in time. Do you know the way? Cassius smiled. We spent the last days on that hill. We were just about to go back. Nephis didn't say anything, looking at the sky. Sonny sucked his lips. Well, can I come with you? They're not going to say no, right? The blind girl turned her head to her companion, a clear question written on her face. Neph? Nephis lowered her eyes, staring at Sonny. After a while, she said, No. What? Sonny started to panic. Problem. No problem. The knot in Sonny's chest loosened. He felt his heart beating wildly in his chest. But Sonny smiled nonetheless. Well, all right. The rest of the way to the tall hill did not take a lot of time. With Nephis leading the way, taking all the right turns at all the right places, there was no need to explore the labyrinth and backtrack after encountering a dead end. And to Sonny's relief, there were no scavengers around. In fact, they could have moved even quicker if not for Cassia, who walked slowly even with the help of her staff. Guided by the golden rope, she carefully explored the ground ahead before taking each step. The uneven paths of the Crimson Forest were not an ideal surface for a blind person to walk on. Sonny didn't say much, periodically casting an incredulous glance at the strange pair. No matter how he looked at it, Cassius seemed to be dead weight. Perhaps it was cruel to think that, but in the merciless reality of the dream realm, misguided kindness was a sure way to end up dead. Then again, in his first nightmare, everyone thought he was dead weight, only for him to be the last man standing. Before meeting and observing the girls, he still had hope that Cassia's terrible flaw hid an unexpected and powerful aspect. But from what he saw, that wasn't the case. If she couldn't even walk properly, what kind of power was there to hide? Nothing could outweigh the ruthless fact that the blind girl couldn't protect herself, and thus would only drag her companions down. One had to be a fool, or not fond of living, to allow that to happen. So, which one of these descriptions suited Nephis? He wondered if neither did. The sunset was not far off when they reached the hill. After climbing it and approaching the massive growth of coral, Nephis dismissed the golden rope and immediately summoned it again. This way, it was untied and appeared in her hands in a neat bundle. Ah, so it's a memory. Sonny wondered what qualities the magical rope had. Soon his curiosity was satisfied. Right in front of his surprised eyes, the length of the rope suddenly began to increase. Soon it was 3 times as long as it was before. Nephis calmly tied both ends of the rope into loops, and then threw one of them into the air, accurately coiling it around a prominent protrusion near the top of the coral pillar. Then she tested if the rope would hold, swiftly climbed up, and waved from above, giving Sonny the signal to follow. After hesitating for a second, Sonny approached the rope and grabbed it. He couldn't help thinking that this would be the perfect opportunity for her to cut his head off. With him helpless while climbing and Nephis standing on the top pillar, yeah. The vivid picture appeared in his mind. Stop being paranoid, Sonny thought, trying to calm himself down. It's not that he was sure of Changing Star's impeccable moral qualities. Instead, he was certain of one thing. If Nephis really wanted to kill him, she wouldn't have needed to wait for an opportunity. She could have just cut him into ribbons whenever she pleased. Simultaneously scared and reassured by this thought, Sonny nimbly climbed up and joined Nephis at the top of the coral mound.
He then turned around and watched curiously, wondering how Cassia was going to get to them. The blind girl dismissed the wooden staff and approached the rope. Then she caught it in a hand, traced it down to the loop at the end, and placed her foot inside. As soon as she was done, Nephis grabbed the rope and started pulling, lifting Cassia little by little until she had reached the top. She only had to grab Nephis's hand and make a step to join them. Huh, efficient. The coral mound was much larger than the circular stone platform of the giant knight's neck. In fact, it was almost like a small island. At the highest point of the island, hidden behind some coral blades, the girls had made a little camp. There were piles of seaweed to sleep on, strips of scavenger meat drying under the sun, and a fire pit. Sunny pointed to the makeshift fire pit.
Was it you 2 nights ago? I've seen an orange light in the distance.
Cassia's face darkened.
Yes, this was the first time we made a fire, but it turned out to be a really big mistake.
Nephis sighed. Sunny raised an eyebrow, surprised.
Why?
The blind girl touched her hair and turned her head to Nephis.
At night, any light will attract monsters. We were attacked by scavengers first, and then...
She paled and didn't finish, but she didn't have to. The memory of the colossal tentacle was still fresh in Sunny's mind. It seemed that he was lucky to meet these two when he had. If not, he was certainly going to make a fire tonight to roast some scavenger meat.
I see.
Nephis looked at the sky.
It should be fine now. We still have time before the sun sets.
After that, she got busy making the fire. Cassia simply sat on a pile of seaweed and waited. Not knowing what to do, Sunny lowered himself to the ground and let his tired, bruised body rest. After a while, he spoke.
I have fresh meat in my rucksack. Do you have water?
Cassia smiled.
Yes.
After that, she extended an arm to him. A second later, a beautiful bottle made of patterned blue glass appeared in her hand.
That's a memory I have. It's always full.
Sunny took the glass bottle and looked at it with envy.
An endless supply of water, huh? Sure beats my super loud bell. Thank you.
He brought the bottle to his lips and greedily drank the cool, delicious water. Indeed, no matter how much he drank, the amount of water inside did not seem to decrease.
Is it really endless?
Cassia touched her hair again.
Not really. If you turn it upside down and let the water flow, it will stop in half an hour or so, but then it refills soon after.
Cassia shrugged as Nephis finished making a fire. Without looking up, she took Sunny's rucksack and opened it. Immediately, the soul shard rolled out. The tall girl looked at it, then at Sunny. Then she put the shard back in and pulled out the meat. Sunny became tense, preparing a misleading answer, but Nephis did not ask, so he pretended like nothing had happened and continued his conversation with Cassia.
It's still a great memory. Getting drinkable water is not an easy task.
Cassia nodded and smiled, pleased by his words. Soon the rich smell of roasting meat permeated the air. At the same time, the sun was beginning to approach the horizon. A loud rumble came from somewhere beneath, and first traces of the black water began to appear between the crimson walls of the labyrinth. Sunny looked east, where the skies were already growing dark. Then he uncomfortably shifted.
Do scavengers come all the way up here?
Nephis turned the meat and nodded.
Yes, but only at night. Once the sun comes out, most of them seem to disappear.
Sunny grinned, having an idea of why there weren't a lot of monsters in the labyrinth in the day.
That's because they all gather near the place where I had been spending my time recently. You should have seen it, the tall cliff to the west of here. Well, it's actually a massive statue.
Cassia opened her eyes wide.
A statue? But for you to survive, it should be... Yes, it's a giant statue of a knight, at least 600 feet tall. It's missing its head, so I hit at the top of the neck. Anyway, the day we were sent here, 2 sea creatures fought each other near that statue. When the water receded, I saw an enormous carcass lying there, with hundreds of scavengers slowly tearing it apart.
Nephis nodded.
That would explain the lack of nightmare creatures during the day.
How long? Sunny blinked.
How long is what?
Changing Star stared at him for a few seconds, making everyone feel uncomfortable.
How long until they are done devouring the carcass? Oh, 1 day more. 2 at most.
Nephis turned away, took the meat away from the fire, and then quickly extinguished it.
She's definitely a woman of few words.
The 3 of them ate in the dimming light of the twilight. The meat was juicy, tender, and indescribably delicious. It was better than anything Sunny had ever tasted, even back at the Academy's cafeteria. Of course, his excruciating hunger was likely to thank for that. From time to time, they would pass the glass bottle to each other. When they were finished with their meal, the dark sea was back, and the night was upon them. Everything was consumed by absolute darkness. Of course, Sunny could easily see both Nephis and Cassia. Under the cover of the night, Changing Star remained pretty much the same. The blind girl, however, allowed her true emotions to show, thinking that no one would see. She seemed much more lost, lonely, and frightened than she did in the day. As if trying to resist these feelings, Cassia said in a bright voice,
"How about we formally introduce ourselves? I'm Cassia."
Nephis glanced in her direction and shrugged.
"Neph."
Next, it was Sunny's turn. He exhaled, glad they didn't ask him his name directly. Most likely, he would have been able to provide his human name. However, it also might have depended on the wording of the question. Relieved, he smiled and answered,
"I'm Sunless, but you can call me Sunny."
Sunny was slowly growing fond of having conversations in the dark. Without the burden of light, people were more relaxed and honest. It reminded him of the frequent blackouts that used to sweep through the city when he was a little kid. His family had no choice but to huddle together and spend a few hours doing nothing but talking to each other. Now, those dark hours had become some of his most precious memories. He was silent for a few moments and then said,
"Since we're going to be depending on each other, should we share what abilities and memories we have at our disposal?"
This was a logical suggestion. If they were going to fight side by side, knowing each other's strengths was more or less vital. Still, he noticed Nephis glancing in his direction with a guarded look on her face. Luckily, he was obscured by darkness, at least to his companion's eyes.
"I'll start,"
Sunny said, both to show his sincerity and to reveal information about himself in a controlled manner. If he took the initiative to talk, he still had to tell the truth, but how much and to what extent was still for him to decide. If they were to ask, and he had to answer, however, things would become unpredictable.
"My attributes give me an affinity to shadows. I also have a slight affiliation to divinity. Lastly, I am prone to finding myself in unlikely situations."
Cassia listened carefully, and then lowered her head as though embarrassed.
He's telling the truth. Not that we doubted your honesty."
Sunny gritted his teeth. He chided himself silently.
"Why not trust me? I only spent my whole time at the Academy earning the reputation of a pathological liar."
Sunny smiled, trying to hide his nervousness.
"Really? That's good to know. But why are you so sure that I'm being honest?"
The blind girl shifted a little.
"Oh, that's my ability. I can see people's attributes. Sometimes I also receive, visions. They can be about the future or the past. I mean, that's what I think. It's only happened a couple of times. It hasn't exactly been predictable.
Sunny swallowed, but then relaxed.
So, she's an oracle of sorts. Luckily, her insight is limited to attributes. Otherwise, I'd be in real trouble. Still, I'll have to be careful around her.
He finally realized how the blind girl had known about his birthday. The question was whether she had seen it in a vision of the future or in a vision of the past. If it was the former, was it safe to assume that he would certainly be able to celebrate at least one more birthday? Or does knowing the future actually affect and change it? For example, after learning that he was definitely going to survive, Sunny might have naturally relaxed and lowered his guard. Then he would die as a result of it. It surely seemed possible, right? That's assuming that the future could be changed, but maybe it wasn't. Then his head was spinning from the possibilities. Sunny decided to avoid this line of thought for now. Instead, he hid his inner turmoil and said in a friendly tone,
That's a good ability. Speaking of abilities, you have already seen mine. My shadow can move independently and explore. It can't affect the material world, but we share sight and hearing. That way, I can spot danger before encountering it. The shadow is fast and stealthy. It can go anywhere and is almost impossible to notice. Oh, I can also see in the dark.
He smiled, expecting the girls to understand and appreciate the utility of the Shadow Scout. Their reaction, however, was a bit strange. Nephis slowly turned her head in his direction, while Cassia became a bit pale and raised her hands to cover her chest.
What?
Nephis frowned and said in a flat tone,
Have you ever used your ability in the academy?
Sunny blinked.
What a strange question. In the academy? Sure, of course. Why? Oh, right. They think I'm a pervert. Shit.
Before the girls could say anything, he hurriedly raised his hands and blurted,
But I have never used it to do anything improper. You have to believe me.
Fortunately, it was the truth. However, both Nephis and Cassia looked skeptical. Sunny gritted his teeth.
I had more important things to do than whatever you're implying. I spent almost every waking hour focused on learning how to survive.
Nephis raised an eyebrow.
I haven't seen you in class, even once. Of course you didn't. While you were busy wiping the floor with other sleepers, I was studying wilderness survival.
It was Changing Stars' turn to blink.
Wilderness? What? There's such a course?
Cassia seemed equally puzzled.
Yes, there is. It might seem like an afterthought for most people, but for an outskirts kid like me, who never went to a fancy school or saw a private tutor, learning how to survive in the wilderness is the difference between life and death. Without it, I would have drowned the moment we were sent to the Dream Realm.
On a rare occasion, Nephis looked completely bewildered. She rubbed her wrists and stared thoughtfully in his direction.
I see. I didn't know.
Sunny grimaced and struggled to keep the venom from seeping into his voice. When he finally spoke, his tone was light and amiable.
That's okay. It's natural for someone of your status not to know.
When he mentioned her status, a strange smile appeared on the Changing Star's face. But in the end, she didn't reply. Sunny continued.
Anyway, that's my ability. As for memories, I have 3. One is armor, one is a sword, and the last one is a really loud bell.
Now it was their turn to share. After a short pause, Nephis spoke.
My attributes give me an affinity to light and fire, as well as a strong affiliation to divinity. I have 2 memories. A rope.
While she was speaking, Sunny was looking at Cassia, trying to read her expression. From what he saw, Nephis was telling the truth, but also not the whole truth. Judging by how hard the blind girl was trying to hide her true feelings, the secret hiding among Changing Stars' attributes was not at all trivial.
Interesting.
And a sword.
The rope is very sturdy and can change its length. The sword is very sharp and can protect its wielder against soul attacks. to a certain extent. My ability can be used to heal. Sunny didn't miss the wording of the last part. Can be used to heal. Does that mean that its main purpose was something else? He was pretty sure that Nephis would not reveal all of her cards, just like him. However, healing abilities were extremely rare. Having one that could heal, but was not limited to healing, was unheard of. But then again, she was Changing Star, one of the few people in history to receive a true name in the first nightmare. If Sunny were to consider his own aspect ability, nothing seemed impossible. I wonder what her aspect rank is. Outwardly, he pretended to be excited. You're a healer? That's great! Having a healer among us is incredible luck. Cassian nodded and smiled. Neph is also an amazing fighter. You should have seen her dealing with those scavengers. Well, I also did not actually see it, but it sounded intense. Sunny didn't need anyone to tell him how formidable a warrior Nephis was. He had seen it with his own 2 eyes. Sort of. At least it was through his shadow's eyes. Well, whatever it had instead of eyes. Meanwhile, Cassius sighed. It's my turn? My attributes are nothing special. I guess I have an affinity to revelations and fate. My ability is like I told you before. It's not very useful. About my memories, I have 3. The bottle, the wooden staff, and this armor. You already know about the bottle. The staff can create wind. The armor is actually of the awakened rank. Neph gave it to me when we met. It has a very powerful protective charm. So, she's not only carrying Cassia on her back, she even gave away her only clothes. An awakened rank armor at that. Why? Who is Cassia to her? The blind girl turned away and added after a while, I used to be a pretty decent fencer before. Now I can't really fight. The last 2 sentences were obviously related to her flaw. Sunny and Nephis, however, both chose to keep theirs a secret, even though knowing your companion's flaw was also important for cooperation and having each other's backs. Sharing something like that demanded a very high level of trust. Right now, there was no trust between them, and even if there was, Sunny did not plan to ever share his flaw with anyone. Nephis, too, seemed to have a lot of secrets. After a while, he said, Good, that's good. I think we have enough tools to survive, provided we use them right. I guess it's time to sleep? In the darkness, Nephis tilted her head, listening to his words with a distant look. All right, I'll take first watch. Sunny decided to be helpful and said, Actually, my shadow doesn't sleep. It can wake us up if something happens. Changing Star slowly smiled, narrowing her eyes at him. I'll take first watch. Feeling a bit of coldness in her voice, Sunny sighed and shrugged. Suit yourself. What are you even going to watch, huh? You can't even see anything. Whatever. Just don't blame me when something giant swallows us in the middle of the night. He shuddered at the thought. Please let us not get swallowed in the middle of the night. Sleep was avoiding Sunny. For a while, he sat silently in the darkness, listening to the calming rumbling of the waves. In this rare moment of respite, memories of the past few days came flooding into his mind. However, he was too tired to seriously think about anything. He was warm, full, and relatively safe. For now, that was more than enough. Soon, the rhythm of Cassia's breathing changed, indicating that she had fallen asleep. Nephis was guarding the camp, motionless and, as always, a bit distant. With her silver hair and fair skin, she looked like an alabaster statue. Sunny sighed. He hesitated a moment before fixing his gaze on Nephis. Hey, can I ask you a question? Nephis glanced at him and shrugged.
The lack of an audible response clearly indicated that she remembered his ability to see in the dark. Sonny wondered if what he really wanted to ask may be too personal. He considered for a moment.
I thought your legacies come into the spell with a whole inherited arsenal of memories. I mean, that's supposed to be your main advantage. How come you only had 3?
Nephis was silent for a few moments. Actually, I only had 2. The rope came from Cassia. Sonny raised an eyebrow.
Oh, I see.
Realizing that her answer wasn't really an answer, Nephis forced herself to go on. We lost most of our memories when my father passed away. The ones that remained were sold one by one over the years to keep the family afloat. This sword and armor came from my first nightmare. So that's how it was. Sonny realized that the fall of the immortal Flame Clan might have been more thorough than he had thought. Still, something about it didn't make sense.
Surely, with your clan's reputation and standing, there were other ways to make money.
Nephis remained cool and composed. Her voice was crisp and strong. There were other reasons. Then she unexpectedly turned her head in his direction. Can I ask you a question in return? Sonny swallowed.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nephis tilted her head. How did you know that I'm a legacy? Sonny blinked. He expected something harsher, something about him.
Simple, I heard Castor mention it. He was scolding other sleepers to make them treat you with respect.
She gave him a nod and turned away. What thoughts were hidden behind her calm gray eyes? Sonny did not know. Some time had passed before he gathered enough courage to ask the question that he really wanted to ask. Before doing it, though, he made sure that Cassia was sound asleep and lowered his voice. Can I ask you another question? Without getting a negative response, he continued, Why are you burdening yourself with her? A corner of Changing Star's mouth curled up slightly. Why wouldn't you? Sonny gritted his teeth, feeling the flaw pushing the truthful answer out of his mouth. No. To be honest, he wanted to believe to the last moment that the answer would be yes, but one of the things he had lost after the nightmare was the ability to lie to himself. Truth was merciless. It's not that Sonny did not pity the blind girl or didn't want to help her. It's just that he knew with certainty that it was simply not something he could do. He was barely able to save himself, let alone carry a helpless person across the dream realm. If he tried, they would just die together. Still, he couldn't help but be a little disappointed in himself. Nephis, however, did not seem to judge him. She showed no reaction at all. She simply answered the question for herself. Because I want to. That was not the response Sonny expected to hear. He had been prepared for Nephis to either lecture him about virtue and compassion or disclose some obscure way to make Cassandra's seemingly weak ability incredibly useful. However, she did neither. Nephis expected him to believe that she was putting her life in danger to the point of sacrificing an awakened armor-type memory because that was something she simply wanted to do. Sonny was doubtful. People were not that selfless. At first, he dismissed her response as a non-answer, but the more he thought about it, the more disturbed he felt. Because maybe it was actually the truth. Due to the circumstances of his life, Sonny had never really done things because he wanted to. Most of the time, he was doing them because he needed to. It was never a question of want. It was always a question of must. For him, this was a basic rule of life. But was it really? Or was it just a matter of perspective? Nephis had certain advantages in her upbringing, but they weren't as ample as he had imagined. She had no wealth and no arsenal of relics to empower her. However, she did have a mentality that was different from Sonny's.
It wasn't impossible for her to have the audacity to disregard need in favor of something as frivolous as desire, and do things that a normal person like Sunny would never do, like helping a blind girl simply because that was what Nephis wanted to do. Perhaps that mentality was the greatest advantage of all. Perhaps that was the real barrier that separated legacies from the rest of them. That was a lot to think about. However, before Sunny could gather his thoughts, Nephis suddenly spoke again. "My turn." Sunny wondered if Nephis meant that she planned on asking Sunny a question. Indeed, that was what she meant. Changing Star once again turned to Sunny. "Do you know the legend of Odysseus?" What sort of a weird question was that? Why would she ask such a thing? Bewildered, Sunny shook his head. Then, remembering that she couldn't see him, "No." Nephis sighed and turned away. A few moments later, she softly said, "Odysseus was a hero in an ancient war. In the legends, some humans back then had powers akin to the Awakened. Achilles with an aspect of indestructible body. Diomedes, who was so ferocious, even the god of war was wary of him. Ajax, who was as strong as a giant. Odysseus was not the strongest and not the bravest. However, he was the most cunning." Sunny blinked, staring at the silver-haired girl. Where did this come from? Why is she suddenly so eloquent? Meanwhile, Nephis continued. "In the end, Odysseus's cunning ended the war, and he prepared to sail home. However, the gods cursed him to endlessly wander the seas, never to return. Over the years, he survived one horror after another, and lost all of his companions. Then, shipwrecked, he found himself on an island where the beautiful fairy Calypso lived." Changing Star's ethereal, strangely wistful voice resounded in the darkness, creating an enthralling atmosphere. Sunny couldn't help but listen with the utmost attention. Calypso fell in love with Odysseus and invited him to her palace. For many years they lived together in harmony. The island was like a paradise, filled with all kinds of wonders, delicacies, and delights. As long as loving Calypso was by his side, Odysseus was even immortal. But the longer he stayed, the more time he spent sitting on the shore, looking at the sea with bleak eyes. Nephis smiled. In the end, Odysseus built a makeshift boat and abandoned the island, leaving all its delights, the beautiful fairy, and even his immortality behind. So my question is, why did he leave? Sunny blinked. He thought, "What? What kind of mind game was that?" He even considered that Nephis was mocking him, but it didn't seem to be the case. It looked like she was sincerely interested in the answer. He thought for a bit and then spoke without too much conviction. "Maybe it was because he was far away from home." A fleeting smile appeared on Nephis's face. "Far away from home. All right." After that, she turned away and lowered her head, becoming like a statue again. It seemed like their conversation was over. Grumbling internally, Sunny lay down and tried to fall asleep. However, the image of bleak-eyed Odysseus kept appearing in his mind. After a while, he whispered, "Well, did he make it back home?" Soon, Nephis replied, "Yes, he returned to his wife and son. They lived happily ever after." When he was already half asleep, he heard Changing Star's quiet voice once again. This time it was barely audible and aimless, as though not directed at anyone. Odysseus was the first human to break the will of the gods. In the morning, Sunny and Nephis were the first to get up. While the sun was rising and the sea was retreating, they made a fire and began preparing a simple breakfast. With Cassia still asleep, they did not talk to each other much. It was like the last night's conversation did not happen. However, after some time, they somehow ended up discussing the plan for the next few days. Nephis had some ideas. "With what you told us about scavengers crowding to the west, The logical step would be to start moving east as soon as we can. Of course, north and south are also acceptable, but that won't put as much space between us and the enemy. Sonny nodded, agreeing with that logic. We have explored to the east a little, but not enough to confidently make it to the next high point in a day. That's why the best course of action would be to spend the day scouting a path to that group of cliffs over there and move the camp tomorrow. He sighed. Do you have any idea where we are? Would there be a human citadel to the east? Nephis shook her head. I've never heard of a region that fits the characteristics of this place. In any case, we have to move to find out more. We'll either find a citadel, encounter an unconquered gateway, or die. East is as good of a direction as any. Plus, it's the safest, because there's a horde of monsters to the west. At that point, Cassia suddenly sat up straight. Her eyes were wide open, and her face was a little pale. She looked nervous and excited. Nephis frowned. Cassia, what's the matter? The blind girl turned to them and smiled. A vision. I had a vision. Like a prophetic dream? Sonny thought, trying to come to terms with this new reality of someone being able to see the future, or the past. Meanwhile, Changing Star stretched her hand as though prepared to summon her sword. Are we in danger? Cassia energetically shook her head. No, it's not that. People. I saw a castle full of people. She smiled and pointed with her finger. I don't know how far it is, but I'm sure that it's in that direction. Sonny and Nephis looked at each other, not knowing whether to be glad or petrified. Cassia's small, delicate finger was confidently pointing west. West was the more dangerous direction. It was crawling with nightmare creatures. But what if that was the closest citadel? Was it worth gambling their lives on Cassia's vision? Sonny didn't want to risk it, but he suspected Nephis would have a different opinion. He glanced over at the girl, who gripped the handle of her sword with a resolved look on her face. Cassia had just revealed her prophetic vision that told her where she, Nephis, and Sonny might find civilization. Stranded in an unknown corner of the dream realm, she expected this to be happy news, and yet her companions weren't celebrating. She didn't need to see their faces to know that something was wrong. In the ensuing silence, the smile slowly disappeared from Cassia's face and was replaced by confusion. What's wrong? You guys don't sound pleased. Sonny sighed. No, nothing is wrong. It's just that direction is the one we wanted to avoid. He paused a beat and then elaborated. That's where I came from yesterday. There's a lot of scavengers down there. The blind girl's face fell. Oh. Nephis, who was quietly listening to them, gave him an indecipherable look before turning her attention to Cassia. Tell us more about the castle you dreamed about. A shadow of the previous excitement returned to Cassia's eyes. With a serious nod, she began describing her vision. I dreamt of a vast, ruined city, built of weathered stone. It was surrounded by tall, impregnable walls. A wide array of monsters were wandering its narrow streets. In the center of the city, there was a hill, and on that hill stood a magnificent castle. She smiled. But there were no monsters in the castle. Instead, it was full of people. I'm sure that they were awakened. Some were guarding the walls. Some were going about their lives without a care in the world. There was food, safety, and laughter. Sonny crossed his arms over his chest. That castle sounded like a paradise if it really existed. It could solve all their problems. Sonny cleared his throat. Did you see anything else?
Cassia frowned, trying to remember. Then her face cleared.
Yes, I saw Sunny leading me through the gates of the castle. That means we will make it.
A brilliant smile appeared on her doll-like face, beaming with so much joy that Sunny couldn't help but curl his lips. Inwardly, however, he was stuck on a certain detail of Cassia's vision. It was that, when talking about reaching the castle, the blind girl only mentioned the two of them. Was there some meaning behind it? Did the dream only show her small snippets, or was it an indication that Nephis, for whatever reason, wouldn't be with them when they reached the promised land? Sunny turned his head a little and secretly glanced at Nephis, trying to discern if she had picked up on that little discrepancy too. Changing Star, however, was as enigmatic as ever. Without showing much emotion, she thought for a while, and then slowly nodded. Okay, then we will go west. If she wasn't worried about Cassia omitting her from the vision, why should he be? While the sea was still retreating, they had their breakfast, and then spent some time planning for the journey and preparing to abandon the temporary camp. In the process, Sunny had a chance to get to know the girls better. It was then that he came to a sudden realization which almost made his head explode from bafflement. That mind-blowing realization had to do with Nephis. Back when they first met in front of the Academy's gates, Sunny had formed a certain impression of the confident, distant girl. Later, her behavior and the different revelations about Changing Star's past only served to reinforce that impression. Nephis seemed to exist a bit apart from the world. She was mysterious, aloof, and rather cool. Her taciturn character and strange speech patterns made people interacting with her feel unnerved and rattled, often revealing more than they had been planning to. The less she talked, the more she seemed to know. That silent, indifferent confidence was arresting, and sometimes even oppressive. However, that impression turned out to be completely wrong. The actual truth behind the matter had nothing to do with being cool and aloof. After talking to her a bit more and observing her interactions with Cassia, he realized that Nephis was simply an incredibly, ridiculously, painfully awkward person. He nearly fainted. Her standoffishness wasn't from pedigree or strength. She was merely unaware of how to act like most other kids their age. She couldn't blend in. It was as though she had no idea how to talk to people. Every time she tried to convey something, she would either use the wrong words or stumble in the middle of a sentence and fall silent. Her tone never matched what she was trying to say. Often, she would forget to put correct intonations in her speech, making questions sound like statements or vice versa. Added to that was the fact that, like many introverted people, Nephis was not in a habit of openly showing her emotions. It's not that she didn't have feelings, it's just that she was really bad at emoting them. As a result, her face always looked cold and neutral. That's why, most of the time, she simply chose to talk as little as possible or not talk at all. All of that added up together, then multiplied by her general weirdness, was ultimately responsible for creating the false image of a mysterious, unapproachable ice princess, when in fact, she was just shy and completely inept in communicating with people. After coming to that realization, Sunny tried with all his might to stop himself from staring at Nephis with wide eyes, but he failed. He just barely managed to not let his jaw hang open. Sunny shook his head and thought to himself, "What the hell? That's not in line with how the #1 student should act. Nephis is a legacy, a hero. She's the kind of person who would be the protagonist in any story, and yet her personality doesn't fit that." In his mind, Nephis had definitely been the type of person to be the main character of any event. At the center stage, there were always confident, strong people like her and Castor. People like himself and Cassia, on the other hand, were relegated to exist far away in the background. Now, however, no, that line of thought was also wrong. The fact that Changing Star had problems with expressing herself and lacked social skills did not mean that she was not strong. In fact, it might have meant the opposite. She still achieved everything that she had achieved, but with the added layer of adversity. She was still dangerous, perhaps even more dangerous than he initially expected. If she wasn't the gallant hero, the truth was, Sunny didn't know what drove Nefis. At that moment, Nefis finally noticed that Sunny was staring at her. She looked at him and, after a long pause, asked in an emotionless tone, "What?" He blinked, extricating himself from the sudden flood of thoughts, and cleared his throat.
Nothing. I was just going to ask, when are we setting off?
Nefis paused and turned toward the mouth of the cave. She seemed to be pondering something, making silent calculations in her brain.
Soon.
Sunny chuckled internally. She really can't manage more than one word, can she? She was clearly the leader of their makeshift group, and yet pitifully shy. It didn't make sense. Utterly bewildered, Sunny hid his emotions and smiled.
All right then.
In the gray light of morning, they abandoned the tall hill and ventured west, retracing their steps from yesterday. Knowing the path, the small party made quick progress. Nefis was walking in front, her sword arm ready to strike at any moment. A bit behind her was Sunny. This time, the responsibility of holding the golden rope and guiding Cassia along was entrusted to him. Of course, the actual creature, leading them was his shadow. It scouted ahead, carefully observing the labyrinth for signs of danger. The labyrinth was just as it was before, confusing and seemingly endless. Crimson blades of coral protruded from the black mud, creating a vast, tangled forest. However, today, something about it felt different. Sunny wasn't able to put into words what this difference was. Maybe it was imaginary. Maybe his anxiety was leading him to see the world less charitably. But he had the uneasy feeling that it was only a matter of time before they were set upon by monsters. Soon enough, a few moments later, a ferocious growl echoed through the labyrinth. The strangled snarl died out into a disquieting rattle. Sunny's shadow was the first to hear it, but it was only a matter of seconds until the noise reached Nefis and Cassia's ears. Sunny felt Cassia's hand grip him tighter. He imagined she had to be terrified, and felt a pang of guilt about expressing his desire to abandon her last night. Nefis was on the edge of battle mode. She straightened her back and glanced back to her companions.
We may still be able to avoid these monsters. We just need to be careful.
Sunny knew her optimism was misplaced as his shadow stumbled onto a mass of hulking, hungry scavengers. They weren't getting out of here without a fight, and they weren't equipped to win one. They were doomed.
Stop,
Sunny whispered, observing the group of scavengers through his shadow. As soon as the word left his lips, Nefis summoned her sword. After studying the surroundings for a second, she turned her head and glanced at him with a question in her eyes. Cassia, meanwhile, froze in place and hesitantly raised her staff. Sunny counted the monsters.
1, 2, 3, 5.
The hulking beasts seemed like the weaklings of the pack, similar to the one he had killed. However, their wounds were not as pronounced and terrible. Each of them was much more of a threat than the mangled one from before, and there were half a dozen of them at least.
There are scavengers on the path ahead. 6 of them. They're slowly moving in our direction.
Nefis cast a gaze forward. There was a calculating look on her face.
They're done with the carcass.
Sunny thought for a moment and then shook his head.
No, I don't think so. But maybe there's not enough meat for everyone anymore, so some stragglers had no choice but to leave with an empty stomach.
Nefis nodded and gestured to a nearby branching path.
We'll circle them.
The 3 sleepers hesitantly moved forward and changed paths, giving a wide berth to the group of monsters. Tense and grim, they continued walking, trying to stay on course and not get lost in the labyrinth. However, over the next hour, they were forced to turn in a random direction again and again to avoid other scavengers. They were making no real progress and were just as close to the giant statues when they started. At some point, they were catching their breath near one of the numerous dead ends of the Crimson Labyrinth. They had no choice but to wait since a large number of creatures were moving past their hiding spot, separated from them by a long length of a twisting coral passage. Sonny sighed and shook his head.
We can't go on like this. At this rate, we'll never make it to safety before sunset.
Cassia was the first one to react.
Maybe we should turn back.
That was a reasonable suggestion. However, Sonny felt reluctant to agree. Nephis shared his thoughts.
It will only get harder tomorrow.
She was right. By tomorrow, there would be even more scavengers flooding the labyrinth. Cassia was exasperated.
Then what should we do?
Changing Star tilted her head, thinking. After a while, she turned to Sonny.
Fight.
Fight? Fight against dozens of those monstrosities? Was she crazy? Sonny tried to hide his derision.
I know that you are skilled with that sword, but have you forgotten that each of those things is a whole rank above us? We won't survive in a fight against many.
Nephis nodded.
We avoid large groups, cut down smaller ones. If there's one or two of them, there's a chance.
Sonny wanted to retort, but couldn't find a good reason. In the end, he gave up.
Fine.
Nephis stared at him for a while.
Have you studied the corpse of the scavenger you had killed?
What was that supposed to mean? A bit surprised, Sonny shook his head.
No.
He was a bit busy being in pain and trying to make it to safety before the sea returned. And why would he study a corpse? Then he vaguely remembered Julius mentioning something about this. But before he could remember it, Nephis raised her voice again.
Scavengers have 3 weak points on their bodies. The first one is obvious. It's their joints. Anything that has to be flexible can't be too rigid. So, there are gaps in the armor above the joints. By targeting the joints, you can diminish their ability and attack capacity.
Oh, so by studying a dead monster, one could better understand its strengths and vulnerabilities. This idea was so obvious that Sonny admonished himself for not realizing it sooner. Nephis continued her explanation.
The second weak point is similar. It's where their torso connects to their carapace. If you manage to accurately hit that spot, you can heavily injure a scavenger and deal serious damage to its body. However, unless you succeed in severing its spine, the wound won't be fatal. It'll still be able to fight for a while.
Sonny couldn't help but notice that Changing Star's awkwardness seemed to disappear whenever she talked about things that she felt confident about, like ancient heroes, or killing things. He found that truth intriguing.
The last weak point is on their back, approximately at the level where the eyes are. There's a slightly concave, discolored cavity in their armor. It is where several armor plates connect. The chitin there is comparatively thin. If you can pierce through it, you can destroy the brain directly. That will be a killing blow.
That tactical information may be true, but Sonny wasn't sure if it was useful. That weak point was too high to be hit by a human. After all, scavengers were more than 6 feet tall. It was as if Nephis read his thoughts.
That weak point is very hard to target. Circling a scavenger is almost impossible due to their size, speed, and the attack range of their pincers.
She looked at him.
If we stumble on a single scavenger, I'll be the bait. My task will be to make it turn around and then restrain it, exposing the third weak point. Your task will be to kill it.
Sonny gulped.
What if there's 2 of them?
As usual, Nephis paused before answering, "Don't die." It wasn't long before they were left with no choice but to attempt to fight against a scavenger. Behind them, there was a long stretch of the labyrinth with no suitable branching paths for them to turn onto. Ahead of them, there was a small clearing with only one other passage leading out of it. Not far into that passage, a massive scavenger was moving slowly in their direction. Sunny described the situation and waited for Changing Star's feedback. Without much delay, she gave him a nod. "We fight in the clearing." After that, Nephis gently guided Cassia to the wall of the labyrinth and helped her find a place to sit. "Wait here. We'll be back." Nephis moved to walk away. Cassia grabbed her hand. Her face was pale and tense.
Neph, you... be careful, okay?
Nephis blinked and tilted her head a little. Then she smiled. Sure." With that, she and Sunny hastily headed for the clearing. By the time they got there, the scavenger was seconds from appearing. Sunny's shadow flew out of the passage and reattached itself to his feet. Without having to discuss things with Nephis, he quickly hid in the shadows and waited there, hoping for a chance to attack. Nephis, on the other hand, strolled to the center of the clearing and calmly stood there. Her shoulders relaxed and her back straight. An elegant longsword appeared in her hands, carelessly pointed to the ground. Not knowing what else to do, Sunny silently repeated her words. "Don't die." A second later, the scavenger walked into the clearing. With his tiny eyes spotted Nephis, an evil light ignited in them. Without wasting even a second, the massive monster screeched and rushed forward to attack. Its huge pincer shot forward with terrifying speed, tearing the air in its path. Nephis swiftly sidestepped, dodging the pincer, then leaped backward, removing herself from the path of the rushing monster. Simultaneously, her sword flashed in the air, cutting deep into the joint of one of the scavenger's front legs. Azure blood spattered on the ground. Of course, the small wound was too insignificant to slow the scavenger down. With surprising agility, it twisted and delivered a crushing sideways swipe. Nephis, who just barely landed on her feet, had no choice but to deflect the blow with her sword. She managed to disperse most of the impact by holding the blade at the right angle, but the remaining force was still enough to throw her off balance. At that moment, the second pincer came down. Instead of trying to regain her equilibrium, Changing Star went with the fall and somersaulted over one hand, ending up distancing herself from the monster a bit. Her sword lashed out again. The follow-up attack followed almost immediately. However, Sunny did not care about the details anymore. The only thing he cared about was that, through this risky series of dodges and leaps, Nephis had managed to circle to the opposite side of the clearing, forcing the scavenger to turn its back to the shadow in which he hid. Gritting his teeth, Sunny lunged forward. "It's now or never." Before Changing Star finished her last dodge, before the scavenger's pincer crushed on her from above, before Sunny had time to become scared, he closed the distance between himself and the monster and jumped with all his might, landing on top of its carapace. Then he used all of his weight to thrust a hand forward.